Hey guys, tonight we are heading somewhere wide, quiet, and rather uncomfortable. Forget for a moment the clean frontier towns of old paintings, where every cabin has a cheerful chimney and every horse waits patiently beside a fence. The real edge of settlement was darker than that, lonelier than that, and filled with long stretches of silence in which a distant sound could mean almost anything. So, if you enjoy these slow journeys into the stranger corners of history, feel free to subscribe or leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and allow the room around you to become very still, because somewhere beyond the walls you can hear horses. Congratulations! You have just woken up on the Texas frontier in the spring of 1836. And already you have a problem. Your roof leaks, not badly, not enough to justify climbing onto it before breakfast. But a thin line of water has found its way through the rough wooden shingles and fallen during the night into a clay bowl placed beneath the offending spot. Plink, then silence. Plink, then silence again. It is the sort of small annoyance that occupies much of frontier life. History remembers battles, treaties, raids, elections, famous speeches, and men sitting stiffly for portraits. You are mostly thinking about the roof. Your bed is a crude wooden frame, covered with blankets. The blankets smell faintly of smoke, because everything you own smells faintly of smoke. Your shirt smells of smoke. Your hair smells of smoke. Even the dried corn hanging near the wall seems to have absorbed years of wood fire. Outside, morning is beginning. A pale strip of light appears beneath the door. You hear someone stirring in the next room, followed by the soft scrape of iron against stone as yesterday's ashes are disturbed and the fire is coaxed back to life. There is no alarm clock. There does not need to be one. There are animals to feed, water to carry, fences to repair, fields to work, leather to mend, wood to split, and meals to prepare from ingredients that would make a modern kitchen look almost indecently luxurious. Your world is made from work, and beyond that world lies grass, an astonishing amount of grass. The plains stretch outward beneath a sky that seems too large for the earth beneath it. There are patches of timber along the rivers and low rises where the ground folds gently upward, but much of the country is open enough that a rider can sometimes be seen from a remarkable distance. This sounds comforting. It is not. Visibility works both ways. You can see riders coming. Riders can see you. The settlement is small. A handful of cabins, rough fences, livestock pens, storage buildings and cultivated ground form a fragile little island of human intention in a landscape that does not particularly care whether you remain there. Some families have come from farther east. Others have moved through Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, or Louisiana before arriving here. They carry iron pots, rifles, Bibles, blankets, seed, tools, and stories. Always stories. Stories travel faster than official news on a frontier. A traveler stops for supper and tells you about a family attacked farther west. A trader describes horses disappearing during the night. A man passing through says he saw tracks near a creek. Someone else swears that a war party has crossed the river. Another insists that the danger has passed. Nobody knows. That is the difficult part. Fear on the frontier does not always arrive screaming. Usually it sits quietly at the supper table. You eat cornmeal and listen. You mend a harness and listen. You walk to fetch water and look toward the horizon. You wake during the night because a horse has made an unfamiliar sound. Then you lie still. There it is again. A nervous snort from the livestock enclosure. Perhaps a wolf. Perhaps another horse. Perhaps nothing. You tell yourself it is nothing. You become very skilled at telling yourself this. The Comanche are somewhere beyond the settled farms. That is what everyone says. But somewhere is not a useful distance. Comanche territory, later commonly called Comancheria, is enormous. Its influence stretches across much of the southern Great Plains, covering parts of what will become Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico. There are no neat border posts announcing where one political world ends and another begins. The frontier is porous. People trade across it. They negotiate across it. They marry, travel, hunt, steal, raid, bargain, and sometimes kill across it. Spanish officials have spent generations trying to understand this landscape. Mexican authorities inherit the same difficulty. Now, Anglo-American settlers are discovering it for themselves. The mistake is imagining the Comanche as people merely hiding somewhere in the wilderness. They are not hiding. You are the newcomer. That difference matters. The plains around you are part of an older human geography. Hunting grounds, trade paths, river crossings, seasonal camps, and remembered places that existed long before your fence posts were hammered into Texas soil. To you, the prairie looks empty. To someone raised here, it can be full of information. A bent patch of grass, fresh tracks beside water, buzzards turning in the distance, the condition of a buffalo trail, smoke where smoke should not be, dust on a horizon where no storm is moving. You are trying to survive in a country whose language you barely understand. And the people you fear understand it intimately. This becomes especially unpleasant when you consider the horse. You own horses, you like horses, you may even consider yourself a good rider. Then you see a Comanche rider. The comparison is discouraging. By the 18th and 19th centuries, horses are woven deeply into Comanche life. Children learn to handle them from an early age. Skilled riders can control a mount with extraordinary confidence while keeping their hands available for bows, lances, shields, or other tasks. A horse is transportation. It is wealth. It is food in desperate circumstances. It is a trade good. It is a measure of status. And in war, it becomes something else entirely, speed. That is what frightens you, not simply violence, speed. A conventional military force has baggage. It has wagons, supplies, officers, orders, camp equipment, tired infantrymen, and animals that must be fed. A raiding party can move differently. It can appear where people thought it could not appear. It can strike before word travels. And by the time soldiers arrive, the riders may be many miles away. You hear accounts of Comanche warriors covering extraordinary distances. You hear that they can ride through country where soldiers become lost. You hear that they know waterholes invisible to outsiders. Some stories are exaggerated. Frontiers produce exaggeration almost as reliably as they produce blisters. But enough of the stories are true, and that is worse. You step outside. The air is cool, the grass is wet around your boots, and somewhere nearby a cow complains about breakfast. For a moment the world feels peaceful. There is wood smoke rising from another cabin. A woman carries a bucket. Someone is already working with an axe. A child runs barefoot through mud with the remarkable enthusiasm children reserve for activities adults have specifically told them not to do. It almost feels ordinary. That is another thing history often loses. Danger and ordinary life occupy the same place. People living near Comancheria do not spend every minute trembling behind walls. They fall in love. They quarrel with neighbors. They complain about weather. They plant corn. They laugh. They become bored. They worry about money. Someone burns breakfast. Someone loses a tool and accuses everyone else of moving it. Children grow. Babies are born. Old people die. Life continues, because life nearly always does. But certain habits reveal the fear underneath. Weapons remain nearby. Livestock is watched carefully. Travel is safer in company. Strangers bring news. Tracks are examined, and when dogs begin barking after dark, conversation stops. There is another reason the fear feels so intense: captivity. Death is easy to understand, at least in the abstract. A person is alive, then a person is dead. Captivity creates a different terror because nobody knows what follows. People disappear during raids. Some are killed, some escape. Some are ransomed, some are traded between communities. Some are incorporated into native societies. And occasionally, a captive becomes so deeply part of a new community that the idea of rescue becomes far more complicated than outsiders expect. Few stories will illustrate this more painfully than that of Cynthia Ann Parker, but you do not know her name yet. Not this morning. For now, she is simply a child living at Fort Parker, a settlement in central Texas. Fort Parker is not a great military fortress. The name makes it sound more impressive than it is. It is essentially a fortified family settlement, protected by a wooden stockade with blockhouses at the corners. Members of the extended Parker family and their neighbors live and work there. The walls provide reassurance. Walls usually do. Human beings have spent thousands of years building them and then immediately feeling better. Unfortunately, a wall is only as useful as the decisions made around it. On a May morning in 1836, many of the men are working outside the fort. Then riders appear. They include Comanche warriors and their allies. At first, the approach does not immediately become an attack. There is communication. Requests are made. The situation remains uncertain for just long enough to make every decision dangerous. Should the gate remain closed? Should the strangers be treated as peaceful visitors? Would refusing them provoke violence? Would admitting them invite it? Frontier diplomacy often takes place without the luxury of complete information. A mistake can become fatal in seconds, and here it does. The attack comes quickly. Men are killed. People scatter. The settlement that seemed secure a few minutes earlier becomes confusion. Dust, shouting, running feet, frightened animals, smoke, and the horrible realization that the walls meant less than everyone believed. Several captives are taken. Among them is Cynthia Ann Parker. She is about 9 years old. Imagine that moment from the viewpoint of the people left behind. The riders disappear, the prairie swallows them, and the child is simply gone. There is no telephone, no telegraph line reaching across the plains to announce her location. No organized search system capable of following riders through an immense country they understand better than you do. A trail can disappear on hard ground. Rain can erase tracks. A pursuing party needs water. It needs food. Its horses tire. Every mile north and west increases the distance between the captive and the world from which she has been taken. For her relatives, the raid becomes a family wound that remains open for decades. For Cynthia Ann, something stranger happens. She survives. At first, her new life is undoubtedly frightening. She is a child separated violently from everything familiar. But children learn, languages come, habits change, faces that were once strange become familiar. Years pass. The world of her childhood begins to fade. She is eventually incorporated into Comanche society. She receives a Comanche name. She marries a Comanche man, Peter Nocona. She has children. One of those children is Quanah Parker. And this is where the comfortable categories begin to collapse. To Cynthia Ann's birth relatives, she remains a kidnapped white girl who ought to be returned. To Cynthia Ann herself, after many years, the situation appears very different. Her husband is here. Her children are here. Her language and daily life are here. Home is here. The frontier loves simple stories. Civilization against wilderness, settler against warrior, captive and rescuer, but human beings are inconvenient. They refuse to remain inside the roles later generations prepare for them. Years from now, Cynthia Ann will be forcibly returned to her birth community. People will call it a rescue. She will not experience it that way. But tonight, you know none of this. You are still standing beside your cabin. The morning sun has climbed higher. There is work waiting. Your rifle rests near the doorway. It is a respectable weapon. Perhaps that comforts you. It should comfort you a little, just not too much, because the great terror of facing Comanche warriors is not merely that they are skilled fighters. It is that the technology in your hands has serious limitations. Your firearm can kill at a distance, but after firing, it must be reloaded. Powder, ball, ramrod, primer, hands working through a familiar sequence that feels perfectly reasonable while hunting deer. It feels less reasonable when several mounted warriors are closing the distance. 20 seconds can be a very long time. Half a minute can feel like an afternoon. And somewhere beyond the horizon, there are riders who have spent generations learning exactly what to do during those precious moments when your gun is empty. The prairie looks peaceful again. Wind moves through the grass in long, soft waves. Nothing is there, at least. Nothing you can see. And perhaps that is the first lesson of life on this frontier. You are not frightened because the Comanche are always coming. You are frightened because they might be. The difference is enough to keep a rifle beside the bed, and enough to make a quiet horse, somewhere in the darkness, suddenly sound very loud. The afternoon passes slowly. You spend part of it repairing a fence that seems personally committed to collapsing. This is not the heroic frontier promised by later paintings. There is no dramatic sunset behind you, nobody is playing a fiddle. You are wrestling with a crooked piece of timber while insects investigate your neck. The rifle remains within reach. It is worth looking at that weapon more closely, because your confidence in it explains much about the danger you face. A muzzle-loading firearm is powerful, against an animal or against a distant target when you have time to prepare. It can be extremely effective, but warfare on horseback changes the equation. Once you fire, smoke blooms in front of you. For a moment, your own weapon obscures your vision. Then comes the reload. You reach for powder. Your fingers need to behave. This is harder when people are trying to kill you. You measure the charge. You load the ball. You use the ramrod. You prepare the ignition system. Every movement takes time. A practiced shooter can become fast, but there is a difference between fast and fast enough. A skilled mounted archer does not share the same problem. The Comanche bow is compact enough to use from horseback and powerful enough to be deadly at close range. A practiced warrior can loose arrows rapidly while moving. More importantly, he does not have to stop. Movement is protection. Movement is confusion. Movement determines distance. You begin to understand why soldiers trained in European-style warfare can find this maddening. Their instincts tell them to form, aim, fire, reload, advance, maintain order. The riders in front of them are under no obligation to cooperate. They approach, withdraw, scatter, circle, and return. They may provoke a shot deliberately. A nervous defender fires too early. Another follows, then another. A line of loaded guns becomes a line of empty guns. And suddenly the riders turn. Now they come forward. This is the moment your stomach understands before your mind does. Your rifle is not useless, far from it. But the enemy has learned to build tactics around its weakness. And they have had a very long time to practice. The sun lowers over the prairie. You finish with the fence, for now it stands. This feels like a victory inside the cabin. Supper is simple: corn, beans, perhaps a little meat. The fire makes the room warmer than necessary, but when darkness comes, nobody complains about the light. Outside, the frontier disappears. The window becomes a black rectangle. Beyond it lies a world you cannot see. You listen to the animals, you listen to the wind, you listen to the small noises of people preparing for sleep. Then you look once more at the rifle beside the door. The weapon is loaded, the door is barred, the horses are close. You have done everything a sensible settler can do. And that is the uncomfortable realization waiting at the end of your first day. Sometimes doing everything correctly is still not enough, because the people beyond the edge of your firelight are not wandering bands without strategy or purpose. They belong to a power that has been growing across the plains for generations. To understand why your little cabin feels so vulnerable, we have to understand how that power came to exist. And for that we must leave your smoky hearth behind and travel backward toward colder mountains and an age when the people later feared across Texas did not yet rule the southern plains. The night settles heavily over the settlement. Your supper is finished, the bowls have been scraped clean, the fire has been reduced to glowing coals, and somewhere outside, a horse shifts its weight against the hard ground. You should be sleeping. Instead, you're listening. This becomes a skill on the frontier. Not fighting, not shooting, listening. The smallest noises acquire meanings they never possessed back east. A dog barking once means very little. A dog barking continuously deserves attention. Horses becoming restless together deserve even more. A sudden silence among insects can make a tired man sit upright in bed. And hoofbeats are something else entirely. You learn that distant horses do not sound the way you imagined. There is no dramatic thunder, not at first. The sound can begin as something so faint that you wonder whether you have invented it. A soft vibration, a rhythm beneath the wind. Then it disappears. You wait. Nothing. Your shoulders relax. And there it is again. You reach for the rifle. Everyone does. There is a peculiar comfort in holding a weapon, even when the weapon may not solve the problem in front of you. Your fingers know the shape of the stock. You know the weight. You know how the lock works. You have cleaned it carefully because damp powder or a dirty mechanism can transform a firearm into an expensive club at exactly the wrong moment. You have perhaps practiced shooting at a tree. The tree was very cooperative. It did not move, it did not shoot arrows, it did not approach you at full gallop, and it certainly did not understand that after you fired, you would need time to reload. That last detail matters more than almost anything else. The Comanche have spent generations fighting enemies armed with firearms. Spanish soldiers carry them. Mexican troops carry them. Traders carry them. Settlers carry them. The weapon is not mysterious. Its strengths are known. So are its weaknesses. Imagine standing outside at first light. Several riders appear in the distance. They do not immediately charge. Instead, they remain beyond easy range. One comes closer. You raise your rifle. The rider turns away. Another approaches from a different direction. Someone beside you fires. Smoke bursts from the muzzle. The rider disappears behind his horse and races away. Perhaps the shot misses. Perhaps it does not. But now one rifle is empty. Another settler fires. Then another. The temptation is enormous. Every approaching rider looks like an opportunity. Every shot feels like action, but the riders are watching. They are counting in the only way that matters. Loaded, loaded, empty, empty, empty. And when enough weapons have spoken, the character of the encounter can change with terrifying speed. The horses turn, the riders come. Now you understand why stories about Comanche warfare spread so quickly between frontier settlements. It is not merely because the warriors are brave, plenty of people are brave. It is because their way of fighting has developed around mobility. A mounted warrior can choose when to approach. He can refuse an engagement that does not favor him. He can draw defenders away from cover. He can circle. He can disappear behind a rise. He can return somewhere unexpected. And if the encounter turns against him, he can simply ride away faster than most infantry can pursue. The prairie itself becomes part of the weapon. European and American military traditions are accustomed to controlling ground. A fort controls a crossing. A column controls a road. Infantry occupies a position. But what happens when the enemy does not need your road? What happens when there are few roads at all? A Comanche war party can move along river valleys, buffalo trails, and open country. Riders know where water can be found. They understand seasonal conditions. They know which stretches of country exhaust horses and which permit rapid travel. A conventional army entering the same landscape carries its own problems with it. Men need food, horses need grass, everyone needs water. Wagons break, wheels sink, animals wander, guides become uncertain. A military expedition can spend enormous energy simply remaining alive. Meanwhile, the people it has come to fight may already know exactly where it is. You begin to see the unpleasant imbalance. The soldiers are searching for the Comanche. The Comanche do not necessarily need to search for the soldiers. Dust gives them away, tracks give them away, campfires give them away, wagon ruts give them away. Even discarded objects tell stories. The plains are not empty. They are readable. You simply cannot read them very well. This problem has confronted outsiders since long before your little settlement existed. Spanish authorities learned it, Mexican authorities learned it. Now Texans are learning it. Again and again, governments attempt to impose boundaries on a world where political power is measured differently. A line drawn on a map may look wonderfully solid in an office. On the prairie, there is only grass, no ink, no border. No obedient little dotted line explaining that one government ends here and another begins there. A rider crosses without asking the map's permission, and this is part of how Comancheria functions. It is not an empire in the familiar European sense. There is no Comanche emperor sitting in a palace issuing commands to every band. There is no capital filled with bureaucrats carefully recording taxes. Political organization is distributed among bands and leaders whose authority depends on circumstances, reputation, kinship, persuasion, and achievement. Yet across an immense region, Comanche military and economic power shapes what other people can do. Settlements pay attention to Comanche movements. Traders seek Comanche business. Colonial officials negotiate with Comanche leaders. Neighboring peoples make alliances, resist, relocate, or adapt. Horses move through these networks. So do buffalo products, weapons, metal goods, captives, information. The frontier is therefore not simply a place where one civilization slowly advances into empty land. It is a contested world filled with competing communities, each trying to survive and prosper. That truth does not make the experience of a raid less frightening. If anything, it makes it easier to understand why the violence persists. Raiding is connected to economics, prestige, retaliation, warfare, and the acquisition of horses and captives. For the family inside a cabin, however, those larger structures disappear. You do not experience geopolitics when someone steals your horses. You experience the absence of horses, and that absence can ruin you. Without a horse, distances become enormous. A journey that took hours can take a day. You cannot move supplies as easily. You cannot pursue thieves. You cannot escape danger as quickly. A horse is not a luxury on this frontier. It can be the difference between remaining connected to the world and becoming stranded inside it. This is why livestock theft can be devastating even when nobody is killed. Imagine waking before dawn and discovering the enclosure empty. No blood. No bodies, just tracks. Your best animals are gone. Perhaps every useful mount you owned has disappeared into the darkness. You stand beside the broken enclosure looking at hoof prints in the dirt. Someone suggests pursuit. You look at him, then at the empty pen. Pursuit with what? It would almost be funny if it were not your livelihood walking away toward the horizon. The Comanche reputation grows from encounters like these, as much as from great battles. A family hears about missing horses, then a burned cabin, then a traveler who never reaches his destination, then a raid farther south than anyone expected. Stories accumulate. Some become distorted with every telling. Others do not need distortion. The result is psychological distance no longer guarantees safety. That is the terrifying part. You might live peacefully for months, perhaps years. Then riders appear. There may be no warning beyond a dog barking. No declaration of war arrives at your door. No officer informs you that hostilities will begin tomorrow morning. The frontier does not provide appointments, so you adapt. You avoid traveling alone when possible. You keep weapons ready. You pay attention to rumors. You build settlements close enough for neighbors to help one another. You watch children more carefully. And when someone rides toward your home unexpectedly, your first emotion is not hospitality. It is calculation. How many? Armed? Known? Unknown? Friendly? Passing through. You hate yourself a little for thinking this way, but you continue thinking this way because fear, when repeated long enough, becomes routine. And routine is perhaps the strangest part of frontier life. People still marry. They still hold gatherings. Someone still complains that another family's hog has wandered into the wrong field. Someone still plays music. Someone tells a story beside the fire that everyone has already heard several times. Children still laugh. Life stubbornly refuses to become a permanent tragedy. Then a horse makes an unfamiliar noise, and every adult in the room stops talking. You listen. Nothing follows. Conversation resumes. This, more than the dramatic paintings, is what fear probably feels like. Not constant screaming, interruption. Small interruptions in ordinary life. A glance toward a window, a hand resting near a rifle. A journey postponed until another family can travel with you. A child being told not to wander too far. A horse tied closer to the cabin tonight. The fear lives in habits, and it can last for generations. By the time settlers are moving into central and western Texas in greater numbers, stories about Comanche riders have already been circulating for decades. The Spanish knew the same anxiety. So did communities in northern Mexico. Raiding routes reach far south. Some expeditions travel extraordinary distances into Mexican territory, taking livestock and captives before returning north. Imagine the logistical skill required. Hundreds of miles, multiple horses, water sources separated by dry country. Captured animals slowing the return, enemies potentially pursuing from behind. This is not random wandering. It requires knowledge, and knowledge is precisely what outsiders lack. Back inside your cabin, the fire has nearly died. You hear the horse again. This time, you finally stand. You lift the rifle. Slowly, you approach the door. Someone behind you whispers. You raise a hand for silence. The wooden bar comes free. You hesitate. Then you open the door. Cold night air touches your face. The prairie is silver beneath the moon. You stare toward the horses. Nothing. One of them raises its head. Its ears turn. You follow its gaze. Grass moves near the enclosure. Your heart begins beating harder. You wait. Something small emerges. A raccoon. You almost laugh, almost the animal pauses, as if disappointed by your lack of hospitality, then disappears into the grass. You close the door. The rifle returns to its place. You lie down again. But sleep does not come immediately, because tonight it was a raccoon. Tomorrow it may be riders. And here lies the realization that makes frontier fear so exhausting. The Comanche do not need to attack your settlement every night. They do not even need to attack it once. Their reputation travels ahead of them. The possibility changes how you build your home, how you travel, where you keep your horses, when you sleep, and what you hear in the darkness. Military power can be measured in territory captured and enemies killed. But it can also be measured in the behavior of people who have never seen you. Somewhere, many miles away, a settler bars his door because of you. Somewhere else, a family delays a journey. A trader changes his route. A military officer requests more soldiers. A village watches the northern horizon. That is power too, yet it did not begin here. The riders who dominate these plains are descendants of people whose ancestors once lived much farther north and west, in a very different landscape. There was a time when the Comanche did not possess vast horse herds, a time when they did not dominate the southern plains, a time when Spanish settlements had never heard their name. Then an animal arrived that changed almost everything. Let us leave the soot-stained hearth behind. Let the little settlement fade into the darkness, along with its nervous horses and its rifle resting beside the door. We drift backward now, toward the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, where winters are colder, valleys narrower, and a small group of Shoshone-speaking people are about to encounter the creature that will transform their world. The horse is waiting. And once they climb onto its back, the history of the southern plains will never be the same. Let us leave the soot-stained hearth behind. The frightened settlement fades into the distance, and with it go the rough fences, the muddy boots, the loaded rifle beside the door, and the nervous habit of staring toward the horizon. We drift backward now, back before Fort Parker, back before Texas Rangers, back before Comancheria became a name spoken carefully along the frontier. The year is somewhere near the end of the 17th century, and the people who will one day be called Comanche do not yet rule the southern plains. They live much farther north. The Rocky Mountain country of present-day Wyoming is colder than the Texas grasslands you have just left. Winters linger, snow settles in sheltered valleys. Pine forests darken the slopes, and game moves through a landscape of stone, timber, streams, and high country. Here live communities connected to the eastern Shoshone. Among them are ancestors of the people who will become the Comanche. If you could visit them now and tell them that their descendants will someday dominate an enormous territory far to the south, they might find the idea rather strange. Their world is not yet built around horses. They travel largely on foot. Dogs help carry possessions. Families move according to seasons and available food. Hunting is demanding because following large animals on foot requires patience, endurance, and an intimate knowledge of the land. Nothing about this life suggests that one of the greatest mounted cultures in North American history is about to emerge. Then the horse arrives, not all at once. There is no single morning when everyone wakes to discover horses standing politely outside their shelters. The animal moves north through complicated networks of trade, exchange, capture, and human migration. Its distant origin on these plains is Spanish. Spanish colonists brought horses back to North America generations earlier, and over time, the animals spread beyond direct Spanish control. One event accelerates that process dramatically. In 1680, Pueblo communities in New Mexico rise against Spanish colonial rule. The revolt drives the Spanish from much of New Mexico for years, and amid the disruption, horses become more widely available to native communities. Animals are traded, animals are captured, animals escape. Knowledge about riding and handling them travels with the horses themselves. Through connections with peoples such as the Ute, horses reach Shoshone-speaking communities farther north, and now imagine seeing one properly for the first time. You already know animals. You know dogs, you know deer, you know elk and buffalo, but this creature can carry a human being. That fact alone changes the scale of the world. Distances shrink. A hunting ground that required days of walking becomes easier to reach. Heavy possessions can move farther. A hunter can approach game differently. A family can relocate more quickly. A warrior can travel faster than a man on foot can hope to follow. At first, horses are simply useful, then people begin becoming exceptionally good at using them. That distinction matters. Many cultures acquire horses. The Comanche build a way of life around them. Children grow up beside the animals. A young child learns that a horse is not some mysterious object reserved for soldiers or wealthy men. It is simply part of life. There are animals everywhere. Their smell fills camp. Their hair clings to clothing. Their hooves disturb the ground. Their needs shape daily routines. Someone must watch them. Someone must move them. Someone must recover the animal that has decided the grass on the other side of camp is obviously superior. Even revolutionary technologies require chores, and so the transformation begins in ordinary moments. A child climbs onto a horse, falls, climbs again, falls again. Eventually, the falling becomes less frequent. Balance develops before the child has words to explain it. Knees tighten naturally, weight shifts instinctively. The rider learns what the horse will do from the movement of its ears, the tension in its body, and the rhythm of its stride. Horse and rider begin communicating through small pressures, a knee, a heel, a shift of weight, a sound. The hands become less necessary for basic control, and when the hands become free, interesting possibilities appear. A rider can carry a bow, a lance, a shield. He can lead another horse. He can lift objects from the ground. He can hunt while moving. Eventually, he can fight while moving. This is where the change becomes military. Before the horse, hunting buffalo on the plains is dangerous and laborious. The buffalo is enormous. An adult animal can weigh many hundreds of pounds. It is faster than a person. It has horns, and it possesses the unfortunate habit of objecting when someone attempts to kill it. On horseback, the relationship changes. A skilled rider can move beside the herd. He can select an animal, he can approach close enough to use a bow effectively, and then move away. Successful hunts become capable of producing large quantities of meat, hides, sinew, bone, and other materials. The horse, therefore, does not merely make travel faster, it can increase access to the central resource of the plains. Buffalo provide food. Their hides become robes and shelter coverings. Bones become tools. Sinew becomes cord. Nearly every part can be used. More horses can support more efficient hunting. More efficient hunting can support larger and more mobile communities. Successful raiding can produce more horses. More horses create greater mobility. Greater mobility creates opportunities for more hunting, trade, and raiding. A cycle begins, and the people entering that cycle are remarkably well positioned to exploit it. Over the early decades of the 18th century, groups increasingly identified as Comanche move southward onto the plains. The name itself becomes associated with a distinct people. Their separation from related Shoshone communities is gradual rather than a neat moment that can be circled on a calendar. Human identities rarely behave as politely as textbooks would like. Families move, bands divide, languages change slowly, alliances shift. People marry into neighboring communities, new political relationships emerge, but eventually outsiders recognize something new. Mounted Comanche bands are appearing farther south, and they are formidable. The plains suit them. The open country that once made a person on foot vulnerable becomes ideal terrain for horses. Grass feeds enormous herds. Buffalo provide food. Rivers offer water and natural travel corridors, and distance itself becomes protection. Spanish settlements lie to the south. Other native peoples occupy the region. Trade routes connect distant communities. Everything needed for a new power is present. The Comanche begin competing with groups already established on the southern plains, especially Apache communities. This struggle is long, complicated, and violent. The Apache are not weak. They have their own networks, military traditions, and knowledge of the region. But mounted Comanche expansion creates relentless pressure. Raiding reaches camps and settlements. Hunting territories become contested. Access to trade shifts. Over time, many Apache groups are pushed southward and westward from areas of the plains they once occupied. The balance of power changes. Spanish officials notice that is rarely a comfortable moment for an empire. Reports arrive describing new groups of mounted people. Officials try to understand who they are, where they live, whom they trade with, and whether they can be controlled. The answer to that last question becomes increasingly disappointing. Spanish colonial strategy has familiar tools: missionaries, forts, trade, diplomacy, military expeditions, gifts, threats, alliances. These methods have worked with varying degrees of success in other places, but the plains present a frustrating problem. How do you compel people to obey when you cannot reliably catch them? A village can be surrounded. A town can be occupied. A road can be blocked. A highly mobile population spread across enormous grasslands is different. An army marches toward a camp. The camp moves. Soldiers arrive. Ashes remain. Perhaps a broken tool. Old tracks. Nothing else. The soldiers must eat. Their horses must eat. Supplies diminish. Eventually the expedition turns around. The people being pursued return after it leaves. It is a deeply irritating form of warfare if you are the officer writing the report, and reports become increasingly irritated. Meanwhile, the Comanche horse herds grow. Wealth begins walking on four legs. A successful man may possess many animals. Not every horse serves the same purpose. Some are suitable for travel, some for hunting, some for carrying possessions. The best animals can be reserved for war. Breeding matters, training matters, temperament matters. A fast horse is valuable. A fast horse that responds instantly to its rider is more valuable still. Imagine watching a skilled rider cross open ground. There is no saddle in the heavy European military sense. The rider appears almost impossibly secure. His body follows the horse's movement rather than fighting it. At speed, he can lean, turn, reach, loose an arrow, recover, change direction. What looks reckless to an outsider is the product of years of practice. You might spend several months learning to ride and consider yourself competent. A Comanche child may have been riding for as long as he can remember. That difference cannot be corrected during a few weeks of military training. It is cultural. And this is the deeper transformation taking place. The Comanche do not simply acquire a useful animal. Their society reorganizes around what the animal makes possible. Patterns of movement change, hunting changes, trade changes, wealth changes, warfare changes. Even the geography of ambition changes. Places once too distant become reachable. Enemies once too far away become vulnerable. Goods from Spanish settlements become obtainable through trade or raids. Horses themselves become both the means and the objective of further expansion. By the early 18th century, French traders and mapmakers are increasingly aware of the Comanche presence on the plains. To Europeans looking westward from colonial settlements, these riders become part of a political landscape that cannot simply be ignored. And yet the Comanche are still only beginning. The empire that later historians will debate is not constructed with stone roads or government offices. It grows through movement, through horse herds, through control of hunting grounds, through trade, through alliances, through raids, through the ability to make distant communities consider Comanche interests before making their own decisions. That kind of power leaves fewer ruins for archaeologists. But for people living beneath it, the power is perfectly real. Night comes to a Comanche camp somewhere on the plains. Horses graze beyond the shelters. Children settle near their families. Smoke rises into a sky without city light. Far away, perhaps beyond several days of travel, Spanish officials sit at wooden desks and attempt to understand the people whose influence is spreading across their northern frontier. They have maps, they have seals, they have uniforms. They have written orders from powerful men. The Comanche have horses. For the moment, the horses are proving remarkably persuasive, and the transformation is not finished, because owning a horse is one thing. Learning to hunt from its back is another. But turning horse and rider into a single moving weapon requires a level of skill that outsiders will struggle to describe for generations. The child who once fell awkwardly into the grass has grown older now. He no longer falls. He can ride without gripping reins in both hands. He can bend beside the animal at speed. He can draw a bow while the ground races beneath him. And soon, people watching from Spanish settlements, Mexican villages, and distant frontier cabins will discover just how dangerous that combination can become. The plains have given the Comanche mobility. Now they will turn mobility into warfare. The horse is moving beneath you, not walking, not trotting, running. The ground passes so quickly that individual stones and tufts of grass blur into one long brown-green surface. Wind presses against your face, the horse's mane whips backward, and every stride sends a tremendous force upward through the animal's body. For an inexperienced rider, remaining seated would be accomplishment enough. For a Comanche warrior, this is merely the beginning. He has spent years learning not only how to remain on the horse, but how to disappear around it. And this is where the stories told by outsiders begin to sound almost unbelievable. European travelers, soldiers, artists, and traders who observe skilled plains riders repeatedly struggle to explain what they see. A rider gallops toward an enemy. Then suddenly he seems to vanish. The horse continues forward. The rider is still there. He has dropped his body along one side of the animal, using the horse itself as a moving shield. From the enemy's perspective, there is suddenly very little human body available to shoot. There is mostly horse. Then an arrow comes from somewhere beneath the animal's neck. Another follows. The rider rises again. The entire maneuver happens while the horse continues running. Try imagining yourself attempting this. Actually, perhaps do not. You have only recently learned to stay in the saddle without making noises that damage your dignity. The difference between ordinary riding and this kind of riding is difficult to overstate. A Comanche warrior can guide his horse through pressure from his legs and shifts in his body. His hands remain available for weapons. The bow becomes particularly important. It is shorter than the long bows familiar from European warfare. That compact size matters enormously on horseback. A very long bow is inconvenient when the platform beneath you is alive, moving quickly, and occasionally making its own decisions. The shorter bow can be turned and drawn from different angles. A practiced archer can fire forward, sideways, backward, sometimes from positions that make an observer wonder whether the laws governing the human spine have temporarily been suspended. The bow itself demands strength. This is not a toy. A powerful bow, suitable for hunting buffalo or fighting at close range, requires years of physical conditioning and practice. Drawing it while sitting safely on the ground is one thing. Drawing it while your horse is galloping is quite another. The rider must account for movement, distance, the movement of his target, the movement of his own horse, and he must do this without pausing to perform the calculation consciously. Practice has made the calculation instinctive. That is what makes the combination so dangerous. A firearm may have greater killing power at certain distances, but the bow has a tremendous advantage in speed. There is no lengthy muzzle-loading process after each arrow. Another shaft can be drawn, then another, then another. The exact rate depends on circumstances and skill, but a practiced mounted archer can send arrows toward an enemy far more rapidly than a person armed with a single-shot muzzle-loading firearm can reload. And now the mathematics of fear begins to make sense. Imagine you're a soldier. Your musket is loaded. You see riders approaching. You fire. Smoke fills your vision. Your weapon is now empty. The rider is not. You begin reloading. Powder, ball, ramrod. Your hands suddenly seem absurdly slow. The rider is closer. This weakness becomes something Comanche warriors can exploit deliberately. They can approach within threatening distance and encourage defenders to fire. Then withdraw. Wait. Watch. If enough firearms have discharged, the moment changes. The defenders are reloading. Now comes the charge. What feels like chaos to the frightened men receiving the attack may be controlled timing to the people delivering it. The horse closes distance quickly. A gap that looked comfortably wide becomes dangerously narrow within seconds. Arrows arrive, riders spread, dust rises, commands become difficult to hear, men fire too early, others fire too late. Someone drops his ramrod. Someone's horse panics. Someone else discovers that fear has made his fingers clumsy, and the Comanche keep moving. Movement is central to everything. A stationary target is easier to shoot, so do not remain stationary. A predictable target is easier to follow, so do not remain predictable. A concentrated formation can be struck, so scatter when necessary. An isolated enemy can be overwhelmed, So concentrate again. This flexibility frustrates soldiers accustomed to formal battlefield order. There is another advantage. The Comanche warrior does not necessarily seek the kind of battle his opponent expects. He does not need to stand in a line and exchange fire until one side collapses. Why would he? If the situation looks unfavorable, he can leave. This sounds almost disappointingly simple. It is also strategically powerful. Many armies throughout history have suffered because pride persuades commanders to fight battles they should avoid. A mobile raiding society has different priorities. The purpose may be horses, captives, revenge, trade goods, prestige, or the punishment of an enemy. Once that purpose has been achieved, remaining around to participate in a fair battle would be rather unnecessary. Fairness is an admirable quality in children's games. It is not a requirement of frontier warfare. So the riders strike where defenses are weak. They avoid strength when possible. They move at hours when people are tired. They use surprise. They exploit distance. And above all, they understand horses. The quality of Comanche horsemanship also shapes another essential activity: buffalo hunting. Picture a herd spread across the plain. There may be hundreds of animals, sometimes many more. The earth seems to move beneath them. Their bodies are enormous, dark, and shaggy. Dust rises around their legs. The smell reaches you before you get close. A mounted hunter approaches. He does not want to waste arrows. Nor does he want to anger an animal weighing far more than his horse. He moves close, very close, close enough to choose his shot carefully. The horse must remain responsive despite the noise, dust, blood, and stampeding animals around it. This is dangerous work. It is also training. A rider who can control a horse beside a running buffalo herd is developing skills that transfer naturally into warfare. Speed does not frighten him. Crowded movement does not frighten him. Shooting while riding is normal. Turning sharply is normal. Reading an animal beneath him is normal. The boundary between daily skill and military skill becomes very thin, and perhaps this is one reason outsiders find Comanche warriors so difficult to match. A cavalry recruit in a European or American army is taught to become a mounted soldier. A Comanche warrior may have been becoming one since childhood without ever thinking of the process as military training. His education happened while moving camp, while tending horses, while hunting, while racing other children, while following older relatives. By adulthood, the horse is not equipment added to his body. It feels almost like an extension of it. There are economic consequences too. More horses mean greater wealth. A successful raid can produce dozens or even hundreds of animals. Those animals can be traded, given away, used to establish relationships, passed among relatives, reserved for hunting, or trained for war. Horse wealth can reinforce political influence. A generous man can distribute animals and goods. A successful warrior builds reputation. Reputation attracts followers. But Comanche society is not governed by a single monarch. There is no throne somewhere on the plains. No emperor stamps documents announcing that every band must ride south next Tuesday. Different bands possess their own leaders and make decisions according to local circumstances. Leadership depends heavily upon reputation, persuasion, kinship, and proven ability. A war leader who repeatedly makes foolish decisions may discover that warriors are not particularly interested in following him. This makes Comanche political organization difficult for European officials to understand. Colonial governments prefer representatives. They want someone to sign a document. Ideally, they want that signature to bind everyone. A Spanish official meets several Comanche leaders. Gifts are exchanged, promises are discussed. Peace is declared. The official goes home pleased. Then another Comanche band, which did not consider itself bound by the agreement, raids a settlement. The official becomes considerably less pleased. From his perspective, the treaty has been violated. From the perspective of people who never agreed to it, there may be no treaty to violate. This mismatch creates decades of confusion. Diplomacy happens, trade happens, peaceful relationships can last for meaningful periods. But no agreement permanently removes the fundamental fact that Comanche power rests on mobility and independence. By the middle decades of the 18th century, that power has become impossible for surrounding societies to ignore. The Comanche have pushed deeply into the southern plains. Apache communities have been displaced from important regions. Spanish New Mexico must negotiate with them. French traders seek commercial relationships. Horses move north and east through vast native trade networks. Firearms and manufactured goods move in other directions. The plains are becoming connected through an economy that outsiders only partly control. This is when the idea of Comancheria becomes useful. It is not a country with surveyed borders. It is a zone of dominance, a world in which Comanche military, economic, and political influence shapes life across an enormous area. At its height, that influence reaches from the Central Plains toward the settlements of New Mexico and deep into Texas. To the south lies Mexico, to the east, expanding American settlement. And in between is a mounted power capable of frustrating all of them. Spanish officials try military campaigns. The results are mixed. Soldiers can defeat Comanche warriors in particular encounters. But winning an encounter is not the same as controlling the plains. An army marches out. The Comanche move, the army searches. The Comanche watch, supplies decline, horses weaken, winter approaches. Eventually the soldiers return to their forts. The grass remains. So do the riders. Diplomacy often proves more practical. Trade relationships grow. Spanish authorities offer gifts. Comanche leaders negotiate for favorable terms. There are periods of peace and cooperation. People who imagine the frontier as permanent racial warfare miss this complicated reality. Enemies trade, former enemies become allies. Allies quarrel, captives cross cultural boundaries. Families form connections. Merchants profit from relationships that politicians find inconvenient. The frontier is not a wall between two worlds. It is a crowded meeting place, and yet violence remains close. Raiding into northern Mexico becomes particularly important over time. Mounted parties travel astonishing distances southward. They take livestock, especially horses, sometimes captives. Settlements hundreds of miles from the heart of Comanche territory discover that distance is not the protection they hoped it would be. This creates a peculiar map of fear. A village does not need to sit directly beside Comanche hunting grounds to feel their influence. It only needs to lie within riding distance. And riding distance has become very large. Generations pass, Spanish rule ends, Mexico becomes independent. Flags change above government buildings. Officials change titles. Documents carry different seals. The horses do not care. From the Comanche perspective, a new government has inherited many of the same frontier problems as the old one. Mexico struggles to defend its northern territories. Settlements remain vulnerable, resources are limited, military forces are spread thin, and Comanche raiding continues. Farther east, another population is growing. Settlers are entering Texas in increasing numbers. Some have heard the stories. Others have not. They see fertile land, rivers, grass, opportunity. They build cabins, raise fences, plant crops, bring families. They look west and see open country. But the country is not open. That misunderstanding will cost many lives. Because while the newcomers are learning where to dig wells and when to plant corn, the people beyond their settlements have spent generations mastering the movement of horses across the plains. The settlers believe they are approaching a frontier. The Comanche know they are approaching Comancheria. And soon those two understandings of the same landscape will collide. For now, though, evening settles over a Comanche camp. Horses stand in the fading light. A boy who has spent the day riding returns toward his family. Perhaps he is tired. Perhaps his legs ache. Perhaps an older relative has corrected his technique more times than he cares to remember. Tomorrow he will ride again. And again after that. Years from now, somewhere on the Texas frontier, another man will see a rider approaching at full gallop. He will lift a single-shot rifle. He will aim. He will fire. And as smoke fills the air in front of him, he will suddenly understand that the rider's childhood has prepared him for this moment far better than his own has. We drift onward now, deeper into the forgotten days. The horse has transformed the people who ride it. Comancheria has taken shape. And along its eastern edge, cabins are multiplying. Families are moving into country they do not fully understand, carrying furniture, seed, livestock, children, and the stubborn belief that tomorrow will probably resemble today. For many of them it will. until one morning when the dogs begin barking. Now we move from the open grasslands toward the fragile line of cabins appearing along their edge. The horses remain behind us for a moment, dark shapes beneath an enormous evening sky. Ahead, there is lamplight, one small yellow window, then another. A chimney, a fence, a muddy track leading toward a cabin where somebody has decided, with admirable optimism, that this is a perfectly reasonable place to raise children. You are back on the Texas frontier. It is the early 19th century, and the land around you is changing, slowly at first, then faster. Families arrive with wagons carrying nearly everything they own. Iron cookware rattles beside wooden furniture. Blankets are rolled tightly against dust. Seed is stored carefully because losing it can mean losing an entire planting season. Children ride wherever there is space. Chickens object to the journey. Someone's pig inevitably escapes. The frontier is built partly through courage and partly through the repeated recovery of animals that have gone somewhere they should not. When a family reaches its chosen ground, there is little ceremony. No official band plays. Nobody cuts a ribbon. You unload the wagon. Then you begin working. Trees must be cut where timber is available. A shelter must rise before bad weather arrives. Water must be located. Land must be cleared. Food must be prepared. Livestock must be watched. And almost immediately, the horizon becomes part of your daily routine. You look west. You may not even realize how often you do it. At breakfast, you look. While splitting wood, you look. While repairing harness, you look. When a dog begins barking, you look quickly. The habit settles into your muscles. This is life near Comanche. The frightening thing is not that every day brings an attack. Most days do not. Most days bring work, endless work. The cow still needs milking whether you are living beside peaceful farmland or at the edge of a contested frontier. Corn remains stubbornly uninterested in geopolitics. A leaking roof does not care about Comanche diplomacy. Children continue becoming hungry at remarkably regular intervals. So life becomes a mixture of the ordinary and the potentially catastrophic. You might spend an entire morning digging a post hole. By afternoon, a traveler arrives carrying news that a settlement several days away has been raided. Then you return to the post hole because the fence still needs repairing. This is what makes frontier fear so peculiar. It has to coexist with boredom. A person cannot remain terrified every hour of every day. The body will not permit it. Eventually, fear becomes a background condition. You live with it the way you live with weather. Some days it is distant. Some days it gathers. And occasionally, it breaks directly over your home. There are signs people learn to watch. Tracks are among the most important. The ground around a settlement is a kind of newspaper. A skilled tracker can estimate how many horses passed, which direction they traveled, how recently, whether the animals were moving quickly, perhaps whether some were carrying riders. You begin looking at dirt differently. A hoofprint is no longer simply a hoofprint. It is a question: who made it? When? Why? A neighbor finds unfamiliar tracks near water. Word moves from cabin to cabin. Someone rides to warn another family. Livestock is brought closer. Weapons are checked. Children are told not to wander. Then everyone waits. Perhaps nothing happens. Days pass. The tracks may have belonged to travelers who had no interest in the settlement. The tension fades, and this creates another dangerous habit. False alarms teach people to relax. The first warning brings everyone running. The fifth receives a shrug. The 10th becomes a joke until the warning is real. Distance makes everything worse. A settlement may be many miles from organized military help. Even if someone escapes an attack and reaches a fort, soldiers cannot simply appear. They need horses, supplies, information, a direction, a trail. By the time a pursuit begins, a raiding party may already be far away. The Comanche advantage is not only speed during combat, it is speed before and after combat. They choose where to concentrate. They decide when to leave. A settler experiences only the brief moment when that mobility becomes visible. Riders appear, then riders disappear. Everything before and after remains hidden. That uncertainty feeds stories, and stories feed fear. At night, families talk about what happened elsewhere. Perhaps a man traveling from another settlement describes finding an abandoned wagon. Perhaps someone heard that horses were stolen near a river crossing. Perhaps a family has vanished. Details change as the story travels. Numbers grow. Distances become uncertain. One raiding party becomes 3. 10 riders become 50. Fear has never been especially good at arithmetic. But exaggeration does not mean the underlying danger is imaginary. Comanche raids are real. They are often devastating. And they are part of a larger struggle over territory, resources, livestock, and political power. The settlers themselves are not simply passive figures dropped innocently into an empty wilderness. Their arrival represents expansion into lands already used, claimed, hunted, traveled, and defended by native peoples. Every new cabin changes the landscape. Every fence claims ground. Every herd consumes grass. Every road brings more people. From the settler's perspective, the cabin is a home. From another perspective, it may be evidence that strangers are taking permanent possession of land. Both realities can exist at once. That does not make violence inevitable. Trade occurs, negotiations occur, peace agreements are attempted. Individuals from different communities meet without killing one another far more often than dramatic histories sometimes suggest. But competition keeps growing. More settlers arrive, more land is claimed, more buffalo country is disturbed. And government authority pushes westward behind the settlers. The frontier becomes a moving zone of pressure. You happen to live inside it. Your cabin is modest. One room, perhaps two. At night, everyone sleeps close together. Privacy is largely a luxury for people who own more walls. A rifle rests nearby, maybe more than one. Powder must remain dry. A firearm that fails to ignite is not merely disappointing when danger arrives, it can be fatal. So you maintain it carefully. The metal is cleaned, the lock is checked, ammunition is stored where it can be reached. You practice, you tell yourself this makes you prepared. Then you hear another story about mounted warriors. They can fire while hanging beside their horses. They can ride faster than cavalry. They can loose arrows before you reload. They can travel all night. They can find water where you would die of thirst. Some of this is frontier mythology, some is observation. You have no convenient way to separate the two, so you believe enough of it to remain cautious. Your greatest concern may not even be your own death. It is your family. A person alone can make decisions quickly. Run, hide, fight. A family is different. There may be small children, an infant, an elderly relative, someone who cannot ride quickly, someone who freezes under pressure. You cannot simply leap onto a horse and vanish, and the attackers know this. Settlements therefore try to create mutual security. Families build near one another. Some construct stockades. A stockade feels substantial. Tall wooden walls, gates, corner positions where defenders can watch the approaches inside. You feel separated from the prairie. Wood stands between you and whatever may be outside. This is psychologically powerful. Humans love walls. A wall whispers that there is an inside and an outside. Inside is safe. Outside is dangerous. Unfortunately, history has a habit of demonstrating that walls are only as secure as their gates, defenders, and circumstances. Fort Parker becomes one of the most famous examples. The settlement is established in central Texas by members of the Parker family and others. Its stockade offers protection in a region where conflict is always possible. Life develops around it. Fields need tending, animals need grazing, people cannot remain permanently behind the walls. A fort whose inhabitants never leave will soon become a very secure place in which to starve. So men work outside, children move around, daily routines develop, and routine produces vulnerability. On that May morning in 1836, many of the able-bodied men are away from the immediate protection of the fort. Then riders arrive, the people inside face the question frontier families dread. What do they want? The approaching party includes Comanche, Kiowa, and Kichai warriors. But the encounter does not begin as an obvious charge. There is an approach, communication, a request involving water and directions. This creates hesitation. And hesitation is understandable. You cannot shoot every stranger who approaches. Trade and diplomacy depend on contact. Travelers need water. Native people and settlers sometimes interact peacefully. A weapon raised too quickly can create the very violence you hope to avoid. But trust can be dangerous too. Imagine standing near that gate. You're trying to read faces, you're trying to judge tone. Perhaps your mouth is dry. The walls that felt reassuring yesterday now seem strangely thin. Someone speaks, someone answers, a decision is made, then everything accelerates. The attack begins. There is shouting, people run. Gunfire cracks against the wooden enclosure. Horses move through dust. The carefully organized world inside the fort collapses into confusion. Several settlers are killed, others flee, and captives are taken. Among them is Cynthia Ann Parker. She is a child. Her disappearance will become one of the most famous captivity stories in American frontier history. But on this morning, nobody knows that. There is only absence. A family member calls her name, no answer. The prairie beyond the fort is enormous. Somewhere inside that enormous landscape, riders are carrying her away. This is the nightmare frontier parents understand immediately. Death leaves a body, captivity leaves questions. Where is she? Is she alive? Is she hurt? Will she be sold? Will she escape? Will anyone find her? Days become weeks. Weeks become months. The questions remain. Yet Cynthia Ann's story will refuse to follow the ending her relatives imagine. She lives among the Comanche. She learns the language. She adapts. She grows older. The strange world becomes familiar. The familiar world becomes strange. Eventually, she becomes part of a Comanche family. She marries Peyton O'Connor. She has children. And one of those children, Quanah, will become inseparable from the final chapter of Comanche resistance on the southern plains. This transformation is difficult for outsiders to understand. They imagine Cynthia Ann waiting endlessly to be rescued. But human identity is not frozen at the moment of capture. Years matter. Language matters. Family matters. Memory changes. A 9-year-old girl becomes a woman. The people around her are no longer strangers. They are husband, children, relatives, community. When outsiders later encounter her, they discover something deeply uncomfortable. She does not necessarily want what they call rescue. To her birth relatives, this seems impossible. To her, returning to them may feel like being taken away all over again. And perhaps that is the quietest tragedy hidden inside the violent frontier. People do not merely fight over land, they fight over belonging, over who someone is, over which family is real, over which home deserves that name. Back at Fort Parker, none of this can yet be known. Smoke drifts through the settlement. The dead must be mourned. The survivors must decide what to do next. News travels outward. Another story joins the growing collection carried from cabin to cabin, Fort Parker. Remember the name, families hear it, mothers hear it, rangers hear it, politicians hear it. And somewhere on an isolated farm, a father who has never met Cynthia Ann Parker moves his children's beds a little farther from the door. That is how fear spreads, not as one great wave, as thousands of small decisions. A horse tied closer, a rifle loaded earlier, a journey cancelled, a gate closed, a stranger watched more carefully. The Comanche war party that attacked Fort Parker eventually disappears back into the plains. But the raid does not disappear with it. It becomes memory, and memory becomes warning. Years later, people will still tell the story. Some details will change, some will grow more dramatic. But the central lesson remains frighteningly simple. A wall can fail, a rifle can be too slow, help can be too far away, and a peaceful morning can become something else before breakfast is finished. Night comes again to the frontier. You lie beneath a rough blanket. The fire has burned low. Outside, your horses are quiet. You listen anyway, because now you understand why the people who lived here learned not to sleep too deeply. But fear is only one side of the frontier. Beyond the stockade are networks of trade, captivity, adoption, negotiation, revenge, and exchange that tie enemies together even while they fight. So as the darkness deepens, we must follow the riders away from the cabin, not toward another battle. Toward the strange spaces between cultures where a captive can become family, an enemy can become a trading partner, and a stolen horse can travel farther than many human beings will in an entire lifetime. Let us follow the riders away from the stockade. Behind us, the cabins grow smaller. The smoke from their chimneys becomes a thin grey thread against the sky, and then even that disappears. Ahead lies open country, grass, water, buffalo trails, low hills, and distances that seem to stretch forever. If you have spent your life thinking of the frontier as a simple boundary between settlers on one side and native people on the other, this landscape quickly becomes confusing. There is no clean boundary. People cross constantly. Traders travel into Comanche country. Comanche parties visit settlements. Mexican merchants exchange goods with native communities. Horses move north and south. Manufactured goods move west. Buffalo robes move east. Captives move in every direction. News moves with all of them. The same two communities that fight violently one season may trade during another. This is not because anyone has forgotten the violence. It is because survival often requires dealing with people you do not particularly like. The frontier is remarkably good at producing practical relationships. Consider the horse. To the Comanche, horses are more than transportation. They are wealth in a form that eats grass. A horse can be ridden, traded, given as a gift. Lost in a wager. Stolen during a raid, used to strengthen a marriage arrangement, passed to a relative, or exchanged for other goods. A particularly fine animal carries prestige. A large herd represents prosperity. And because horses reproduce, wealth can quite literally multiply while standing in a meadow. This sounds wonderfully convenient, until you remember that wealth capable of walking away has a habit of doing exactly that. Horse herds require watching, animals wander. Predators threaten young stock, and thieves are always interested. Comanche men raid other communities for horses. Other native groups raid the Comanche. Mexican ranches provide tempting targets. Settlers steal and recover livestock. Everyone complains about everyone else stealing horses. The horse economy creates a great circular argument conducted across hundreds of miles of prairie. One raid provokes another. A stolen herd is recovered, then a different herd is taken in retaliation. Someone demands compensation, someone refuses. A peace delegation arrives, gifts are exchanged. 3 months later, young warriors from a different band decide that the agreement is not particularly relevant to them, and the process begins again. This can be baffling to officials. Governments like documents. A governor prefers to sit across from a leader, negotiate terms, obtain a promise, and assume that the matter has been settled. Comanche political life does not always work that way. Bands possess substantial independence. A leader respected in one context may have limited authority in another. A peace agreement made with certain people does not automatically command every Comanche warrior scattered across the plains. Imagine being a Spanish or Mexican official attempting to explain this to your superior. You have negotiated peace. Your superior congratulates you. Then a raid occurs. Your superior asks why the Comanche have broken the treaty. You explain that the raiders may not be the people who made the treaty. Your superior asks why you did not make the treaty with all of them. You stare quietly at the wall. There are easier careers. Diplomacy continues anyway. It has to. Permanent war is expensive. Spanish authorities learn that trade and gift-giving can sometimes accomplish what military expeditions cannot. Mexican officials attempt similar approaches. Later, American representatives will do the same. Comanche leaders understand the value of these relationships perfectly well. They negotiate, they bargain, they expect gifts. They seek favorable access to markets. They understand that Europeans and Americans possess useful goods. Metal tools are useful. Firearms are useful. Cloth is useful, cooking equipment is useful, and the people selling these things generally appreciate horses, hides, livestock, and other commodities in return. Trade does not eliminate conflict. It becomes woven through it. Then there are captives. This is the part of frontier life that produces some of its most difficult stories. Raids sometimes result in people being taken alive. Captives may serve several purposes. Some are held for ransom, some are exchanged, some perform labor. Some are transferred between groups, and some are adopted. The fate of an individual depends upon age, circumstances, family needs, relationships, and countless decisions that cannot be reduced to a single rule. For settlers, captivity becomes one of the deepest fears associated with Comanche raids. A person killed is lost. A person captured is both lost and potentially recoverable. That possibility can torment families for years. Rumors arrive. Someone saw a white child in a distant camp. A trader claims to know where a captive woman is living. A negotiator says several prisoners may be released if enough goods are provided. Families gather horses, blankets, weapons, money, or whatever else might be demanded. Sometimes the captive returns, sometimes the rumor was wrong, sometimes negotiations fail, and sometimes the person everyone wants to recover no longer wants to return. Cynthia Ann Parker becomes the most famous example precisely because her story destroys the simple categories people expect. She was taken from Fort Parker as a child. Years pass. She learns Comanche language and customs. She becomes Nadua. She marries Peter Nakona. She has children. From the perspective of her Parker relatives, she remains Cynthia Ann, from her own lived experience. The answer becomes more complicated. Imagine what 20 years can do to memory. The cabin of childhood becomes smaller in the mind. Faces fade. A language once spoken effortlessly becomes less familiar. New memories replace old ones. You remember another camp, another family, the smell of buffalo hides, the sound of horses before dawn, a husband's voice, children sleeping nearby. Then strangers arrive and tell you that this is not really your life. They say your true home is somewhere else. But what is a home except the place where your life has happened? The question becomes painfully real in the middle of the 19th century. Cynthia Ann is encountered more than once by outsiders during her years among the Comanche. There are opportunities to discuss her return, yet accounts indicate that she does not wish simply to abandon her Comanche family. Then in 1860, everything changes. Texas Rangers and other forces strike a Comanche camp near the Peace River. Cynthia Ann is taken. She is now an adult woman. She has lived among the Comanche for roughly a quarter of a century. She is captured alongside her young daughter, Topsana. To the Texans, the discovery is extraordinary. The famous lost Parker child has been found. She can finally go home, except Cynthia Ann does not appear to understand the event as a homecoming. She has been removed from her family again. Her relatives attempt to bring her back into Anglo-American society. The Texas legislature provides support. People come to see her. She becomes something close to a living frontier legend. But legends are easier to manage than human beings. The woman at the center of the story is grieving. She reportedly attempts to return to the Comanche. Her daughter remains with her for a time. Then Topsana dies. For Cynthia Ann, the loss is devastating. Her husband is gone from her life. Her sons are gone now. Her daughter is gone. The people surrounding her call themselves her family. Perhaps they love her sincerely, but love does not automatically restore the world she has lost. Her story ends sadly, yet one of her sons remains on the plains, Quanah Parker. He grows into a world that is already beginning to close around him. The buffalo still move across the grass. Comanche bands still resist outside control. Raids still occur. Warriors still ride horses with the skill that has frightened outsiders for generations. But something has changed. The settlers are no longer scattered dots along an uncertain frontier. There are more of them. More roads, more towns, more soldiers, more forts, more weapons. The balance is beginning to shift. For much of the earlier frontier period, a Comanche war party possesses an enormous tactical advantage over settlers armed with single-shot weapons. A mounted archer can exploit the reload. He can provoke a shot, withdraw, return. A settler may understand exactly what is happening and still be unable to stop it. Then repeating firearms begin appearing in greater numbers. This will eventually change the arithmetic, but not immediately. For now, the older pattern continues. A small group of settlers travels between communities. They watch the horizon. A wagon creaks. The wheels complain at every rut. Dust settles over clothing until everyone is approximately the same shade of brown. The party reaches a river. Crossing takes time. Animals must be managed. Goods must remain dry. People become distracted. This is when vulnerability increases. Travel is dangerous because travelers are exposed. A cabin at least offers walls. On the road, your protection is whatever you brought with you. So people listen for warnings. Sometimes the warning is dust. A thin cloud rises far away, perhaps buffalo, perhaps cattle, perhaps riders. Everyone stops. Someone with better eyesight stares toward it. The cloud moves. Your hand finds the rifle. The riders become visible. Now comes the terrible uncertainty. Who are they? You cannot identify intentions from several miles away. You wait. They come closer. Perhaps they are Comanche traders. Perhaps they want horses. Perhaps they are carrying goods. Perhaps they want information. Perhaps they are raiders. You do not know. They know you do not know. That uncertainty is power. And yet there are encounters in which nothing violent happens at all. Goods are exchanged, food is shared. People attempt communication through gestures or interpreters. Someone admires a horse. Someone else asks an absurd price for it. A bargain begins. Human beings remain human beings even at the edge of war. The same rider who terrifies one settlement may trade peacefully at another. The same settler who keeps a rifle beside his bed may willingly enter native country to conduct business. Economic necessity crosses boundaries that fear cannot completely close. This is why the frontier cannot be understood as a single continuous battle. It is better imagined as a web. Violence occupies some strands, trade occupies others, kinship, diplomacy, captivity, revenge, friendship, mistrust, every strand touches another, and moving through the center of the web are horses, always horses. By the middle decades of the 19th century, the Comanche ability to obtain, breed, trade, and raid horses remains central to their power. A successful war party can return with large numbers of animals. The captured herd moves slowly compared with the warriors themselves, but it represents wealth worth protecting. Settlers understand this. Mexican ranchers understand it. Government officials understand it. Everyone wants to protect the horse supply. Because without horses, the plains become larger, much larger. A mounted person can cross distances that exhaust someone traveling on foot. Lose your horse and geography expands around you. For the Comanche, losing horses on a massive scale would eventually become catastrophic. But that day has not yet arrived. For now, Comancheria still breathes with the movement of herds. At sunset, horses gather near camp. Children move among them. Women work with hides and prepare food. Men return from hunting or travel. Smoke rises. Dogs wander between shelters, hoping human carelessness will produce dinner. Somewhere nearby, a captive child may be learning new words, perhaps slowly, perhaps unwillingly. A year later, those words may come more easily. Several years later, another language may feel distant. Identity changes quietly. No bell rings when one life becomes another. There is no morning when a captive wakes and announces that the transformation is complete. It happens through thousands of small acts: eating, speaking, working, laughing, mourning, growing older, belonging. That is what frightened many frontier families almost as much as death. A captive might survive, but survival did not guarantee return, and return did not guarantee that the person who came back would be the person who had left. The prairie could take a child and give back a stranger. Or perhaps from the captive's perspective, settlers could take a Comanche woman and insist on calling her by the name of a little girl she barely remembered. The same event looks different depending on which side of the horse you're standing. Night spreads across the plains, a fire burns low. Beyond it, the horses become shadows. For generations, these animals have allowed Comanche warriors to decide distance, to raid far beyond the places outsiders believed vulnerable, and to exploit the painfully slow firearms carried by many of their enemies. But technology does not remain still. Somewhere far to the east, gunsmiths are experimenting with a different idea. A firearm that does not become useless after one shot. A weapon capable of firing again before a mounted warrior can exploit the familiar pause. And soon one Texas Ranger will carry that idea onto the battlefield. The Comanche have spent generations learning the rhythm of the muzzle-loading gun. Fire, smoke, silence, reload, charge. Now that rhythm is about to break. Let us cross the river and follow the Rangers. A new sound is coming to the frontier. Not one gunshot, several one after another. And for the first time in generations, the riders will discover that the old calculation does not always work. Let us cross the river and follow the rangers. Behind us, the old frontier rhythm continues. A rifle fires, smoke rises. The weapon falls silent. A mounted warrior sees the smoke and knows what comes next. Reloading for generations. That pause has helped shape warfare on the southern plains. It is a small mechanical weakness with enormous consequences. A man carrying a single-shot firearm may possess tremendous power for one instant, followed by a long stretch of uncomfortable vulnerability. The Comanche understand that vulnerability. The Texas Rangers are about to find a way around it. The story begins, appropriately enough, with a gun that almost nobody wants. Samuel Colt is a young American inventor, fascinated by the possibility of a firearm capable of firing repeatedly without being reloaded after every shot. The idea itself is not entirely new. Inventors have experimented with repeating weapons before. The problem is making one that works reliably. A frontier firearm must survive dust, rain, mud, hard riding, careless handling, and the occasional unfortunate experience of being dropped onto a rock. Elegant machinery is less impressive when it breaks 50 miles from the nearest gunsmith. Colt develops a revolving pistol known as the Patterson. Its rotating cylinder holds several charges. After one shot, another chamber can be brought into position, then another. To a modern listener, this may not sound revolutionary. You already know what a revolver is, but imagine encountering one after a lifetime of single-shot weapons. You fire. The enemy expects you to reload. Instead, you fire again, then again. The weapon changes more than the number of bullets available. It changes timing. And timing is exactly where the Comanche have held such a powerful advantage. The early Patterson is not perfect. It is delicate. Its mechanism can be troublesome. It lacks some features that later revolvers will make familiar. And perhaps most importantly, for Samuel Colt's bank account, not enough people are interested in buying it. Colt's early firearms business struggles. The United States military is not convinced. Commercial success remains elusive. The grand future of the revolver looks considerably less grand when creditors are involved. Then, the weapon reaches Texas. The Republic of Texas acquires Patterson revolvers, including weapons intended for its navy. Some eventually find their way into the hands of Texas Rangers. And the Rangers have a very particular problem that a repeating handgun might solve. That problem is moving toward them on horseback. One Ranger who understands this especially well is Samuel Hamilton Walker. Walker is young, tough, experienced, and already familiar with the peculiar miseries of frontier warfare. He has fought native warriors. He has served in dangerous expeditions. He has also discovered that 19th century adventure is considerably less romantic when you are actually participating in it. During the ill-fated Mia expedition into Mexico, Walker is captured. The expedition becomes one of the darker episodes in the conflict between Texas and Mexico. Prisoners are forced into a lottery. Beans are placed into a container. Most are white, some are black. The men who draw black beans are marked for execution. Walker draws white, he lives. It is difficult to imagine a more unpleasant way to discover that legumes can influence your future. Eventually, Walker survives imprisonment and returns to Texas. By the middle of the 1840s, he is again serving with Rangers, and now he has access to repeating pistols. The encounter that helps turn the revolver into a frontier legend occurs at Walker's Creek. Captain John Coffee Hayes and a small group of Rangers encounter a much larger Comanche force. The exact details of frontier battles often become tangled in later retellings. Numbers vary, memories grow dramatic. Men who survive dangerous events sometimes discover, years afterward, that they were even braver than they remembered. But the central technological fact is clear. The Rangers have Colt Patterson revolvers. And this changes what the Comanche expect to happen after the first shots. Imagine the encounter from the rider's perspective. You have fought men with guns before. You understand their rhythm, approach, draw fire. Wait for the weapons to empty. Then close the distance. The Rangers fire. Smoke appears. Now should come the pause. Instead, another shot. Then another. Then another. The old rhythm is gone. For a moment, experience becomes misleading. That may be one of the most dangerous things that can happen in battle. A tactic works not merely because it is clever, but because warriors trust the pattern beneath it. You know approximately how long the enemy needs. You know what his weapon can do. You know when to advance. Then suddenly the weapon behaves differently. The rangers can remain mounted and fire multiple times before needing to reload. A single man now carries several immediate shots. Some rangers carry more than one revolver. The volume of close-range fire increases dramatically. This does not make the rangers invincible. Arrows still kill. Lances still kill. A repeating pistol does not turn its owner into a magical figure immune to poor decisions. The fighting remains close and dangerous. Men are wounded. Horses are struck. Dust and smoke make the battlefield difficult to read. But the tactical equation has changed. The Comanche can no longer assume that the first gunshot creates a safe opening. One shot may be followed by another, and another. The very thing that made the old attack so effective, the predictable reload gap, has become uncertain. Walker understands the importance of what he has seen. He does not merely conclude that revolvers are useful. He begins thinking about what a revolver designed specifically for mounted frontier combat should be. The Patterson has weaknesses. It needs improvement. Walker eventually meets Samuel Colt. This is fortunate for Colt because his business fortunes have not exactly been galloping toward prosperity. Walker describes what rangers need: a larger weapon, a stronger weapon, more stopping power, a pistol suitable for hard service from horseback. The collaboration helps produce the massive revolver that becomes known as the Walker Colt. It is an extraordinary object, heavy, powerful, not remotely subtle. If the earlier Patterson looks like an ingenious mechanical tool, the Walker Colt looks as though someone decided a pistol should have the emotional confidence of a small cannon. It holds 6 shots. There are no digits on your nighttime journey, of course, so we shall say that again in the proper civilized manner. 6 shots. That matters. A mounted ranger can fire repeatedly without performing the full muzzle loading ritual after every discharge. The weapon is powerful enough for close frontier combat and can be carried by a horseman. It is also extremely heavy for a handgun. You probably do not want to spend the entire day casually waving one around. Fortunately, your horse is doing much of the carrying. For Colt, the military order connected with the new revolver helps revive his firearms business. For mounted soldiers and rangers, the weapon represents part of a broader technological transition. And for the Comanche, it signals the beginning of a slow erosion in one of their most important tactical advantages. Slow is the important word. The revolver does not suddenly end Comanche power. It does not make frontier settlements safe overnight. It does not send every Comanche band immediately toward a reservation. History rarely changes so neatly. The Comanche remain formidable for decades. They still possess extraordinary mobility. They still know the country. They still have large horse herds. They still raid settlements and ranches. They still choose when and where many encounters occur. A revolver solves one problem. It does not solve geography. Imagine being an army commander trying to campaign across Comancheria. You receive information that a band is somewhere to the west. That is not especially useful. Somewhere to the west describes an impressive amount of North America. You send scouts. Tracks are found, the column follows, the trail divides, you choose one direction, perhaps correctly, perhaps not. The sun rises, the temperature climbs, water becomes a concern. Your horses need grass, your supply wagons move slowly. Then your scouts report that the Comanche camp has moved. Of course it has. You continue. Several days later, your animals are tired. The Comanche horses may be tired too. But the people you are pursuing understand where fresh mounts can be obtained and where water lies. You are attempting to catch mobility with organization. Organization has advantages. It also has wagons. The Rangers try to operate differently. Small mounted groups can move more quickly than conventional army columns. They learn frontier tracking, they rely on scouts, they adopt equipment suited to mounted fighting. And repeating firearms give them greater confidence when encounters become close. But the war remains uneven and unpredictable. There is also an arms race occurring. The Comanche are not frozen in time with bows and lances while everyone around them develops new technology. They obtain firearms too. Weapons move through trade. Weapons are captured. A skilled warrior uses whatever is useful. Yet firearms present their own logistical demands. Powder, ammunition, maintenance, replacement parts. A bow can be supported through local materials and specialized knowledge. A firearm ties its owner to broader trade networks. So old and new weapons exist side by side. A warrior may carry a bow because of its rapid use from horseback. He may also possess a firearm. A lance remains terrifying at close range regardless of what century it is. And a shield still has value when arrows and bullets are moving through the air. The frontier becomes a place where technologies overlap. Old skills do not disappear immediately, they adapt. Meanwhile, settlement continues pushing westward. That may matter more than any single weapon. Every new town shortens the distance between military support and contested country. Every road makes supply easier. Every fort extends government presence. Every farm changes access to grass and water. Every ranch introduces livestock that can be stolen, but also brings more armed settlers into the region. Population itself becomes a kind of pressure. The Comanche have successfully resisted imperial powers for generations, partly because the plains provide enormous space, but space can shrink without physically becoming smaller. A journey that once crossed empty grass now passes ranches. A traditional route encounters fences. A hunting ground has settlers nearby. A river crossing is watched. A military post appears where there was none before. The map fills, and still the raids continue. In the 1850s, frontier families remain frightened. In the 1860s, during the turmoil of the American Civil War, violence on parts of the Texas frontier intensifies again. Federal troops withdraw from many positions when Texas joins the Confederacy. Military attention turns toward the larger war. Frontier defenses weaken. Comanche and Kiowa raiders exploit the opportunity. Settlers in exposed regions abandon homes. The line of settlement retreats in some places. Think about that. For all the confidence of American expansion, there are moments when the frontier moves east. Cabins are left empty, fields return to weeds, fences collapse, families pack wagons and leave land they once believed they would keep forever. Comanche military power is still real. The repeating revolver has not erased it. The United States will eventually bring far greater resources against the Southern Plains tribes, but that future is not yet fully visible. For now, a family still bars the door at night. A ranger still checks his pistols before riding. A scout still kneels beside a hoofprint. A Comanche warrior still chooses his best horse. The old contest continues. But underneath it, the conditions are changing. More firearms, more soldiers, more settlers, more roads, more pressure on buffalo country. The balance is shifting one small piece at a time, and perhaps this is the strange lesson of the revolver. People like to imagine history changing with a single invention. Before the invention, one world. After the invention, another. Reality is slower. The Colt gives mounted fighters a weapon better suited to confronting Comanche tactics. That is important. But a gun alone cannot defeat a society spread across hundreds of thousands of square miles. It cannot find hidden camps. It cannot produce water in dry country. It cannot force warriors to fight when they prefer to disappear. It cannot make tired cavalry horses faster. The real end of Comanche independence will require something much larger and much darker than a better pistol. The United States will eventually stop trying merely to defeat warriors in battle. Instead, military planners will attack the foundations that make resistance possible: food, shelter, horses, and above all, the buffalo. But before we reach that final transformation, the frontier must endure decades more uncertainty. The sun is setting over a ranger camp. A man sits near the fire cleaning a revolver. He turns the cylinder slowly, checks the mechanism, wipes dust from the metal. A few years earlier, the man across the battlefield could count his shots. Now that certainty is gone. The ranger smiles at the thought, but beyond the firelight, the plains remain immense. Somewhere in that darkness are riders he cannot see. He has changed his weapon. He has not yet conquered their world. And tomorrow morning, he must ride into it. The revolver has changed the arithmetic of battle. The next question is whether arithmetic can change geography. The revolver has changed the arithmetic of battle. Unfortunately for the men carrying it, the plains are not made of arithmetic, they are made of distance, heat, cold, dust, water, grass, and thousands upon thousands of places where a mounted war party can disappear. So let us ride farther west. The ranger camp fades behind us. Morning spreads slowly across Texas, turning the eastern sky pale gold. Horses stand with lowered heads while tired men tighten saddle straps and prepare for another day of searching. Somewhere ahead are Comanche riders, probably. That word becomes the great irritation of frontier warfare. Probably a scout has found tracks. The tracks look fresh. Several horses passed this way. Perhaps they belong to a raiding party, perhaps hunters, perhaps families moving camp. The soldiers do not know. They follow anyway. For several hours, the trail remains clear. Then the ground becomes harder. The tracks fade. The scouts spread out. The column stops. Men drink carefully because water is never something to waste. Flies investigate the horses. Someone complains about the heat. Someone else complains about the man complaining about the heat. Military history tends to remember the dramatic parts, the charge, the gunfire, the heroic last stand. It rarely remembers the enormous amount of time soldiers spend being uncomfortable while nothing happens. On the southern plains, nothing happens frequently. That is part of the problem. An army can ride for days and find nobody. Then, while the soldiers are looking west, a Comanche party may pass far to the east and strike an exposed ranch. The soldiers turn around. By the time they arrive, the raiders are gone. The army has weapons, uniforms, organization, supply systems, command structures, but it cannot defend every cabin, every herd, every road, and every water crossing at once. The frontier is simply too large. The Comanche understand this. They do not need to defeat the entire United States Army. They only need to avoid its strongest concentrations and attack where protection is weak. This is the same strategic advantage that has frustrated Spanish and Mexican authorities before. Governments possess more resources, the Comanche possess mobility, and mobility allows a smaller population to exert influence across a much larger territory. A raiding party can travel light. Each warrior may have access to more than one horse. Fresh mounts allow speed to continue over long distances. A rider can change horses when one becomes tired. Captured livestock can be driven north. Water sources known through generations of experience allow routes that outsiders may find difficult or impossible. Then there is the Alano Estacado, the Staked Plains. It is a vast high plain stretching across parts of what will become western Texas and eastern New Mexico. To outsiders, the landscape can be deeply disorienting. There are few obvious landmarks in some areas. Water can be difficult to find. Distances deceive the eye. A feature that looks close may remain stubbornly distant after hours of travel. Imagine entering this country with an army column. You have maps. The maps are not perfect. You have guides. You hope the guides are correct. You have water, not enough to become careless. Your horses require enormous quantities. Every decision becomes logistical. Can you reach the next water source? Will it still contain water? How long can the animals continue? Where is the enemy? And perhaps most importantly, does the enemy know where you are? Usually you should assume the answer to the last question is yes. Comanche scouts can observe an approaching force without revealing themselves. A distant rise provides a view. Dust announces movement. A column of cavalry is difficult to hide. Wagons are even worse. A wagon train crossing open country possesses roughly the subtlety of a traveling village. The Comanche can watch, wait, move. If the soldiers approach a camp, families can scatter. Possessions that cannot be carried may be abandoned, but lives and horses are more important. By the time the cavalry arrives, there may be little left except cold fires and tracks leading in several directions. The soldiers choose one. Perhaps the wrong one. Again. This is why military campaigns against the Comanche so often produce frustration rather than decisive victory. The United States Army can win battles, but first it must find one. And the Comanche have no obligation to provide it. Meanwhile, the settlers continue arriving. The pressure grows. By the middle of the 19th century, Texas is changing rapidly. Towns expand, roads improve, ranches spread, stage routes appear. Military forts form a loose defensive line. Then settlement pushes beyond those forts, forcing another line farther west. The process repeats. Each fort represents confidence. Stone or timber buildings rise, soldiers patrol, flags move above the posts. Families nearby feel safer, but a fort protects only the ground it can influence. A Comanche party does not need to attack it. Why attack soldiers behind walls when there are horses grazing 20 miles away? Why assault a defended position when an isolated ranch offers livestock? The logic of raiding avoids unnecessary strength. This is difficult for military officers because it denies them the kind of victory they want. A commander dreams of finding the enemy force. He deploys his men. The battle begins. His superior weapons and organization prevail. The enemy surrenders. Everyone writes reports. The frontier becomes peaceful. Instead, the commander receives a message that horses have been stolen somewhere else. He sends men. Another report arrives from another direction. He sends more. Soon his forces are scattered across hundreds of miles, protecting everything and therefore protecting almost nothing. Then the American Civil War arrives. Texas joins the Confederacy. Federal soldiers withdraw from many frontier posts. Men who might otherwise have defended Western settlements are pulled into the larger conflict. The frontier becomes thinner. Comanche and Kiowa raiders recognize the opportunity. Pressure on exposed settlements increases. Some families leave. This is one of those moments that complicates the familiar story of unstoppable westward expansion. Expansion is not always forward. Sometimes people retreat. Imagine packing the wagon again. Years earlier, you arrived with hope. You built the cabin yourself. You cleared the field. Perhaps a child was born here. There is a tree beside the house under which someone you loved is buried. You believed this land would belong to your family for generations. Now you are leaving. The door closes. Furniture goes into the wagon. Animals are gathered. You look at the roof you repaired so many times. Perhaps you tell yourself you will return. Perhaps you actually do. But for now, the frontier has moved backward. Comanche military pressure has helped push it. After the Civil War, the situation changes again. The United States emerges with a large military establishment and a government increasingly determined to bring the Western Plains under permanent control. Railroads spread. Buffalo hunters move farther into the plains, settlers return to abandoned areas. More cattle operations appear, telegraph lines make communication faster. The world in which Comanche mobility once provided overwhelming strategic freedom begins to shrink, again, not physically. The plains remain enormous, but every new transportation route changes the meaning of distance. A railroad can move soldiers and supplies far faster than wagons. A telegraph can carry news without requiring a rider to spend days crossing the country. A military commander who once learned about a raid long after it happened may now receive information much sooner. Technology is compressing the frontier, yet the Comanche remain dangerous. Their knowledge of the landscape has not disappeared. Their horsemanship has not disappeared. Their willingness to resist has not disappeared. So the United States Army begins changing its methods. Instead of waiting for raids and then pursuing afterward, commanders increasingly seek Comanche camps directly. Scouts become crucial. Some of the most effective scouts are native men from peoples who have their own histories of conflict with the Comanche. This is another part of Western warfare that simple stories often flatten. It is not merely native people on one side and Americans on the other. Native nations have old rivalries, old grievances, competing territorial interests. Some native scouts cooperate with the United States Army because doing so serves their own purposes. The Army uses that knowledge. Tracks that seem invisible to an inexperienced soldier can be read by a skilled scout. A broken stem, a disturbed stone, horse droppings, ashes, the depth of a hoofprint. Small clues begin narrowing the advantage of concealment. Winter campaigns also become important. Traditionally, military operations often slow during bad weather. Winter is miserable for soldiers, it is also miserable for everyone else. That is precisely the point. A camp caught during winter is more vulnerable. Families need stored food, horses may be weaker, movement becomes difficult, shelter matters more. The army begins pursuing native bands during seasons when earlier forces might have remained in quarters. The war becomes less ceremonial. less focused on finding warriors willing to stand and fight, more focused on destroying the ability of entire communities to remain beyond government control. This is a darker kind of strategy. Find the camp. Destroy supplies, capture horses, burn shelters, force families to seek food and protection at reservations. The target is no longer simply the warrior, it is the system supporting him. And still there is one foundation beneath almost everything: buffalo. You can understand Comanche life without understanding every political detail, but you cannot understand it without the buffalo. The animal provides meat, hides, robes, shelter material, sinew, bone, trade goods. A successful hunt supports families and commerce. Large herds moving across the plains are therefore more than wildlife. They are the foundation of an economy. And during the 19th century, that foundation begins to disappear. Commercial hunters move west with powerful rifles. Railroads make it easier to transport hides and other products to distant markets. Demand grows. Killing accelerates. The scale becomes extraordinary. Buffalo carcasses spread across parts of the plains. Hides are taken. Bodies are left. Bones later become commodities too. The great herds that once seemed almost endless begin collapsing. For plains peoples, the consequences are catastrophic. Imagine watching the disappearance happen slowly enough to understand it, but quickly enough that adaptation becomes almost impossible. A hunting party rides out. There are fewer animals. The next season, fewer still. Places remembered for enormous herds become strangely empty. Grass moves beneath the wind. Nothing grazes there. The silence is wrong. The United States military understands the strategic consequences. Whatever the exact intentions of individual officers, military authorities recognize that the destruction of buffalo undermines the ability of plains tribes to live independently away from reservations. Without abundant buffalo, resistance becomes much harder. A revolver can change a battle. The disappearance of food can change a civilization. That is the grim arithmetic, now replacing the old one. The Comanche warrior once counted gunshots, now families count buffalo. And the number keeps falling. By the early 1870s, the pressure is coming from every direction. Buffalo hunters enter the Texas Panhandle. Military forces operate across the region. Reservations offer rations but demand surrender of independence. Young warriors see their world narrowing. Older people remember a time when Comanche parties could travel across immense territory with little effective outside control. That world still exists in memory. On the ground, it is vanishing. This produces desperation. And desperation produces one final great attempt to strike back. A spiritual leader named Isa Tai rises among the Comanche. He promises protection, he speaks of power, he encourages resistance against the buffalo hunters who are destroying the herds. Quanah Parker is now an important leader among the Quahadi Comanche. He is the son of Cynthia Ann Parker, the child taken from Fort Parker so many years before. History has performed one of its strange circles. The frightened girl from the settlement became a Comanche woman. Her son now rides against the advancing world into which she was born. In the summer of 1874, warriors from several southern plains peoples gather. Their target is Adobe Walls, a small settlement of buffalo hunters in the Texas Panhandle. The warriors possess overwhelming numbers. The hunters possess something else: long-range rifles. The attack will demonstrate brutally how much the technological balance has changed. The riders who once exploited the weakness of frontier firearms are about to encounter guns capable of reaching across distances that once offered safety. But even adobe walls will not decide the war. The true ending will come later. In canyons, in burned camps, in captured horse herds, and across empty plains where buffalo no longer move. The frontier war that began with settlers fearing hoofbeats outside isolated cabins is approaching its final stage. The United States has spent decades trying to catch the Comanche. Soon, it will stop chasing the riders. It will destroy the world that allows them to keep riding. And that will prove far more effective than any revolver. The evening wind moves across the panhandle. Somewhere ahead, buffalo hunters sit behind thick walls with rifles resting nearby. Beyond them, hundreds of mounted warriors gather. Quanah Parker is among them. The son of a captive girl prepares to fight the society into which his mother was born. The buffalo are disappearing, the old plains are closing, and the final chapter of Comancheria is about to begin. We drift onward now, toward the final years of the old southern plains. The sound of the ranger's revolver fades behind us. Ahead, another sound takes its place, a rifle shot. It travels across the open country, rolls over the grass, and disappears into the enormous Texas sky. Then another, and another. These shots are not aimed at Comanche warriors, they are aimed at buffalo. It is the early 1870s, and if you have lived on the southern plains long enough, something about the landscape feels wrong. There should be more animals, much more. For generations, buffalo herds have moved across this country in numbers difficult for later people to imagine. Travelers describe masses of animals stretching toward the horizon. A large herd can darken the landscape. The ground trembles beneath thousands of hooves. Dust hangs in the air. The smell of animals carries on the wind. When a herd moves nearby, you do not simply see it, you feel it. For the Comanche, the buffalo is woven into almost every part of ordinary existence. Meat provides food. Hides become robes and shelter coverings. Sinew becomes cord. Bones become tools. Fat has practical uses. Buffalo products can also be traded. Even the movement of the herds influences where people travel and camp. The horse made Comanche expansion across the plains possible. The buffalo makes life there sustainable. Remove one, and the other becomes far less useful. A magnificent war horse does not solve the problem of an empty stomach. This is why the destruction beginning across the plains is so consequential. Commercial buffalo hunters arrive in increasing numbers. They are not hunting primarily to feed nearby families. They are connected to distant markets. Hides have value. Leather has value. Railroads make it easier to transport products eastward. Powerful rifles make killing buffalo at long range increasingly efficient. The hunter can position himself carefully, choose an animal, fire. The herd may hesitate, another animal falls, then another. A skilled hunter can kill repeatedly without sending the entire herd immediately into flight. The work is methodical. That is perhaps what makes it feel so strange. There is no dramatic battle, no cavalry charge, no line of soldiers, just men with rifles. Shot, pause, shot, pause. Animals collapse into the grass, skinners follow, hides are removed. Carcasses remain across enormous areas. The process repeats, again, again, again. The great herds begin to vanish. To an Eastern businessman, this may look like commerce. To a railroad company, development. To a buffalo hunter, employment. To a Comanche family, watching the herds disappear. It looks like the destruction of the world. The United States military recognizes the connection. Officers understand that plains peoples who can hunt abundant buffalo can remain away from reservations and continue resisting government control. Without the herds, independence becomes harder. Food becomes scarce. Trade suffers. Families must travel farther to hunt. Horses weaken when communities are forced into increasingly difficult movement. Military pressure and ecological destruction begin reinforcing one another. There is an important difference between defeating a warrior and making his way of life impossible. The United States has spent decades struggling with the first problem. Now events are solving the second. Imagine riding into a familiar hunting region. Your father hunted here. Perhaps his father did too. You remember seeing buffalo spread across the grass when you were a child. Now you find bones, carcasses, rotting meat, skinned bodies. The smell reaches you from far away. Buzzards circle. Wolves feed. And somewhere nearby are wagon tracks belonging to hunters who killed animals they did not even need for food. You continue riding. Perhaps there will be a herd beyond the next rise. There is not. You ride farther. Nothing. The emptiness becomes frightening. This is a different kind of enemy. A soldier can be fought. A fort can be avoided. A patrol can be watched. How do you fight absence? Among the Comanche and their allies, anger grows. Buffalo hunters are entering country native peoples, still consider theirs. Treaties and boundaries are disputed, ignored, or interpreted differently. Hunters establish camps and trading points. One of these places is Adobe Walls in the Texas Panhandle. The name suggests something grander than the reality. This is not a major city. It is a small frontier settlement associated with the buffalo trade. A handful of buildings stand in an immense landscape. Hunters come and go. Supplies are stored. Weapons are everywhere. And the men inside possess some of the most effective long-range rifles available on the frontier. Among the Comanche, meanwhile, a spiritual figure named Isa Tai gains influence. He promises protection. He speaks of supernatural power. He encourages warriors to strike the buffalo hunters. For people watching the foundation of their world being slaughtered, the message has obvious appeal. Quanah Parker is among the leaders involved. By now, Quanah has become an important figure among the Quahadi Comanche. His life connects two worlds that have been colliding since before he was born. His mother, Cynthia Ann Parker, entered Comanche society as a captive child. His father was Comanche. Quanah grows up on the plains. He learns the skills expected of a Comanche man. He hunts, rides, fights, leads, and unlike his mother, he has no childhood memory of an Anglo-American home. The plains are his world. Now that world is being dismantled around him. In June of 1874, a large force of Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, and allied warriors moves toward adobe walls. There are hundreds of them. Against such numbers, the small group of buffalo hunters appears hopelessly vulnerable. This should be exactly the kind of encounter that terrified frontier settlements for generations. A few defenders, many mounted warriors, isolation, no immediate army rescue. Open country in every direction. But the defenders possess rifles capable of accurate fire at extraordinary ranges. The old relationship between distance and safety has changed. Before dawn, the warriors approach. Imagine the scene. The sky is beginning to lighten. Horses move through the cool morning air. Men prepare themselves. The settlement lies ahead. For the attackers, surprise is essential. For the defenders, a few additional seconds of warning may mean survival. Then the charge comes. Hooves strike the earth. Hundreds of riders surge toward the buildings. Dust rises, men shout. The old power of mounted warfare seems to return in a single terrifying image. But the hunters are armed. And these are not the slow, single-shot frontier guns around which earlier Comanche tactics developed. The defenders fire from protected positions. Their heavy rifles reach farther and hit harder than the attackers expect. A horse can cross open ground quickly. It cannot cross a bullet's path quickly enough. The attack stalls, warriors circle. They seek opportunities, shots continue from the buildings. The defenders are badly outnumbered, yet the buildings provide cover, and their weapons allow them to threaten riders at distances once considered relatively safe. The psychological effect is significant. For generations, Comanche warriors have manipulated distance better than almost anyone they fight. Now distance itself has become dangerous. The battle continues. The attackers cannot overwhelm the position. Eventually they withdraw. The failure at adobe walls is more than a failed raid. It helps trigger a much larger military response. The United States government has already been struggling to force Southern Plains groups onto reservations. Now the army begins a campaign that becomes known as the Red River War. The strategy is different from the frustrating pursuits of earlier decades. There will not be one column wandering through the plains, hoping to find an enemy willing to fight. Multiple military columns move into the region from different directions. They search systematically. They use scouts, they attack camps, they destroy supplies. They capture horses. The goal is not simply to win battles, it is to make continued resistance impossible. This is the war Comanche mobility has always made difficult. Now the army tries to remove the places into which mobility can escape. Pressure comes from several directions. A band avoids one column and risks encountering another. A camp moves and leaves supplies behind. Winter approaches, buffalo are increasingly scarce. Food becomes harder to obtain. Families cannot live indefinitely on military skill. Children need to eat, elders need shelter, horses need grass. A society is more than its warriors, and the army is now targeting the society. The decisive episode comes at Palo Duro Canyon. The canyon cuts dramatically into the Texas Panhandle. From the open plains above, the ground suddenly drops into a hidden world of steep walls, broken slopes, and sheltered valleys. For native families, it offers protection. Water is available, camps can be concealed below the rim. The canyon provides refuge from wind and weather. It is the kind of place where people might hope to survive while military columns search the open country above, but scouts find the camps. Colonel Ranald Mackenzie leads cavalry toward the canyon. His men discover a route downward. At dawn in late September of 1874, soldiers descend. Imagine waking below. Perhaps the first warning is shouting. Perhaps horses become restless. Perhaps someone sees movement along the canyon wall. Families scramble. Warriors prepare to delay the soldiers while women, children, and elders escape. The goal is not necessarily to defeat Mackenzie's force, it is to buy time, time for families to climb away, time to survive. The soldiers enter the camp. The people flee. And then Mackenzie captures something more important than the shelters. The horses, a vast herd. More than 1,000 animals are taken. This is catastrophic. Remember what the horse means: transportation, hunting, trade, wealth, military power, escape. A family without horses on the plains has lost far more than property. The world has suddenly expanded around them. Distances that were manageable become enormous. Buffalo cannot be pursued as effectively, possessions cannot be moved easily. Warriors cannot raid with the same speed. Families cannot escape cavalry as quickly. Mackenzie understands this. The army cannot keep the entire captured herd, nor does he want the horses recovered, so most of them are destroyed. The animals are driven away from the canyon. Then the shooting begins. One horse, then another, hundreds. Eventually more than 1,000 animals lie dead. The gunfire continues for hours. Imagine hearing it from a distance. You have escaped the camp. Your family is alive. You are somewhere beyond the canyon. Then the shots begin echoing against the walls. You know what they mean. Those are your horses, the animals you bred, trained, rode, traded. The horses that carried children. The horses used in buffalo hunts. The horses that represented years of accumulated wealth. You cannot return. You can only listen. This may be one of the most devastating sounds in the entire history of the Comanche Wars, not because of the number of warriors killed. The battle itself does not produce some enormous massacre. The devastation is economic and logistical. The army has struck at mobility. At the same time, supplies in the camps are destroyed. Food, robes, shelters, possessions needed for winter. The people who escape are alive, but survival has become much harder, and winter is coming. Military columns continue searching, camps are attacked, food stores disappear. The buffalo herds are collapsing, horses are captured. The old strategy of simply moving away from the army becomes increasingly difficult because movement itself requires resources. For generations, Comanche warriors have used the vastness of the plains as protection. Now the plains begin to feel like a trap. There is nowhere to go where food is guaranteed. No distant refuge where buffalo still exist in the old numbers. No endless supply of horses. The army does not need to catch every warrior. It only needs to remain in the field long enough for hunger and exhaustion to do part of the work. Bands begin surrendering. Families arrive at reservations. Some come because they believe resistance is hopeless, others because they are starving. Others because winter leaves no realistic alternative. The movement is gradual. Not everyone comes at once. Quanah Parker and the Quahadi hold out longer than many others. They move across the staked plains. They seek buffalo. They avoid military forces. They try to preserve independence, but the world around them continues shrinking. Imagine Quanah riding across the plains during these final months. He is still a skilled warrior. He still has followers. He still knows the country. None of that can make buffalo appear. None of it can restore destroyed horse herds. None of it can remove the military columns searching the region. This is the cruel final lesson of the Comanche Wars. The United States does not ultimately win because American soldiers suddenly become better horsemen than the Comanche. They do not. It does not win because every Comanche warrior is defeated in battle. They are not. The old freedom ends because the material foundations supporting that freedom are systematically removed. The buffalo disappear, the horses disappear, the camps are destroyed, food becomes scarce, families suffer. Resistance becomes a choice between surrender and starvation. The frontier families who once lay awake listening for hoofbeats could never have accomplished this themselves, nor could a single revolver. It requires the resources of an expanding industrial nation. Railroads, markets, hunters, telegraphs, military columns, supply networks, government policy. All of them pressing into the same landscape. By the spring of 1875, Quanah understands what has happened. There is no great final battle waiting for him, no glorious charge that can reverse the destruction. The plains are still physically there, the grass still bends beneath the wind, the sky is still enormous, but the world that made Comanche independence possible has been broken. So Quanah makes a decision that may require a different kind of courage. He will surrender. Soon he will lead his people toward Fort Sill. The last major free Comanche band will come in. The long era of Comancheria will end, but Quanah Parker's story will not. In some ways, its strangest chapter is only beginning. Because the man who spent his youth resisting the United States will survive the destruction of the old Plains world. He will learn to negotiate with the government that defeated his people. He will become a rancher, a political leader, a public figure. He will meet presidents. And he will spend the rest of his life moving between worlds, much as his mother had done before him. Only this time, the choice will be his. Let us leave the empty buffalo grounds behind. The bones whiten beneath the Texas sun. The canyon grows quiet. The last free riders turn toward Fort Sill. And somewhere among them is the son of Cynthia Ann Parker, riding toward the end of one life and the beginning of another. Let us leave the empty buffalo grounds behind. The bones whiten beneath the Texas sun. Wind moves through grass where enormous herds once passed, and the last free riders of the southern plains turn toward a destination generations of Comanche warriors had spent their lives avoiding, Fort Sill. It is the spring of 1875. Quanah Parker rides with the Quahadi Comanche. Around him are families who have endured the final winter of resistance. They are tired, their horses are fewer, food has become difficult to find. The buffalo that once seemed as permanent as the prairie itself have almost vanished from the southern plains. Behind them lie burned camps, captured horse herds, military columns, and months of pursuit. Ahead lies surrender. There is no triumphant music, no final charge, no dramatic battlefield on which the fate of Comancheria is decided with one heroic moment. The end is quieter than that. Most historical endings are. People simply reach the point where the old life can no longer continue. Quanah understands this. He has spent years resisting. He has led warriors. He has avoided soldiers. He has moved across the Llano Estacado through country outsiders, struggled to navigate, but skill cannot create food. Courage cannot restore the buffalo. A warrior can outride cavalry for a day, perhaps several days. He cannot outride hunger forever. So the Quahadi turn east. Imagine riding with them. The landscape is familiar, but the journey feels different. Every mile carries you closer to a world governed by schedules, government agents, military officers, fences, ration distributions, and rules written by strangers. For generations, movement has been freedom. If conditions become poor, you move. If enemies approach, you move. If buffalo travel, you follow. If grass disappears, horses carry you elsewhere. Now movement itself is being directed toward one fixed place. That may be the deepest meaning of surrender, not simply putting down a weapon, stopping. At Fort Sill, soldiers wait. The post stands in Indian territory, in what will later become Oklahoma. Buildings sit beneath the open sky. There are officers, government representatives, other native people who have already come onto reservations. Quanah and his followers approach. In early June of 1875, the final major band of Free Comanche enters Fort Sill. The old Comanche resistance on the southern plains is effectively over. Think about the distance between this moment and the frightened cabin where our journey began. For generations, settlers feared that riders might appear from Comancheria. Spanish governors tried to contain those riders. Mexican officials tried. Texas Rangers fought them. United States soldiers pursued them. The Comanche survived all of those efforts. What finally breaks their independence is not one superior warrior. It is the destruction of the system supporting life beyond government control. Buffalo, horses, food, mobility, space. Once those disappear, surrender becomes less a military decision than a biological one. People must eat. Children must survive. Winter does not care about pride. Quanah enters reservation life carrying the reputation of a warrior. But now he faces a challenge for which the old skills offer limited guidance. How do you protect your people after the war is lost? Some men never answer that question. They remain trapped in the identity created by conflict. Quanah does something different. He adapts. Perhaps this should not surprise us. Adaptation is part of the history we have been following from the beginning. The ancestors of the Comanche acquired the horse and transformed their society around it. They moved into new territory. They mastered new forms of warfare. They built trade relationships. They negotiated with Spanish, Mexican, and American governments. They incorporated new technologies when useful. Survival had always required change. Now the change is simply more painful. Quanah begins learning how the new political world operates. English becomes important. Government bureaucracy becomes important. Negotiation becomes as necessary as horsemanship once was. The skills required to lead have changed. A generation earlier, a leader might gain influence through success in war, generosity, family relationships, and personal reputation. Those qualities still matter, but now there are government agents, contracts, rations, land questions, Washington officials, businessmen, ranchers, politicians. The battlefield has become an office. It is difficult to imagine a less Comanche environment, and yet Quanah learns to operate inside it. He becomes an important spokesman for his people. He deals with federal officials. He works to protect Comanche interests where he can. He enters cattle ranching. He builds relationships with powerful Americans. And over time, the man once feared as a hostile warrior becomes one of the most recognizable native leaders in the United States. He even builds a large home. It becomes known as the Star House. The house is striking partly because of what it represents. Quanah does not simply disappear into Anglo-American society, nor does he attempt to pretend the old Plains world still exists unchanged. He occupies the uncomfortable space between them. He wears elements of American clothing at times. At other times, his appearance openly reflects Comanche identity. He deals with businessmen and politicians while maintaining his place among his own people. He becomes, in effect, a translator between worlds. Not merely a translator of words, a translator of expectations. Government officials want one thing. Comanche families want another. Ranchers want land. Politicians want agreements. Religious groups want cultural change. Everyone believes Quanah ought to become the version of himself most convenient for them. He does not always cooperate. There is something quietly remarkable about this. The same American society that once feared Comanche riders now invites Quanah into political and ceremonial spaces. He meets prominent Americans. He travels. He becomes acquainted with powerful figures, including Theodore Roosevelt. In the early 20th century, Quanah participates in Roosevelt's presidential inaugural parade. Consider that image. A Comanche leader whose youth belonged to the final wars of the Southern Plains rides in a celebration at the heart of the United States government. Only a few decades separate the two worlds. As a young man, he resisted American expansion. As an older man, he rides through Washington as a nationally recognized figure. History sometimes moves faster than a human lifetime can comfortably contain. Quanah's mother never experienced this transformation. Cynthia Ann Parker's story had ended years earlier. Her life remains one of the saddest threads running through everything we have heard tonight. Taken from her birth family as a child, raised among the Comanche, married, a mother. Then taken again, returned to people who believed they were rescuing her. Imagine the cruelty of that word from her perspective, rescue. To her Parker relatives, it meant recovering a child they had mourned for decades. To Cynthia Ann, it meant losing the family with whom she had spent most of her remembered life. Both sides could believe they were describing the same event accurately. They were not living the same story. After her return to Anglo-American society, Cynthia Ann struggles. She longs for her Comanche family. Her young daughter Topsana remains with her for a time. Then the child dies. The loss deepens Cynthia Ann's grief. Her sons remain somewhere beyond her reach. One of them is Quanah. She will never see what he becomes. She will never watch him surrender at Fort Sill, never see the Star House, never know that he will sit with powerful Americans and advocate for his people. Never know that generations later, his name will remain one of the most famous in Comanche history. Her story and his form a strange mirror. Cynthia Ann begins in the Anglo-American world and becomes Comanche. Quanah begins in the free Comanche world and learns to navigate Anglo-America. Mother and son cross the same cultural frontier in opposite directions. Neither crossing is simple. Neither erases what came before, and perhaps this is where the old frontier stories become less comfortable. It is easy to tell the history as a contest between pioneers and warriors. One side advances, one side resists, eventually one wins. The actual lives are messier. There are settlers terrified of Comanche raids who have genuine reasons to be afraid. There are Comanche families watching outsiders occupy hunting grounds who have genuine reasons to fear what settlement means. There are children taken captive. There are native children separated from their own cultures under later government policies. There are raids, massacres, broken agreements, trading partnerships, friendships, marriages, negotiations, acts of cruelty, acts of generosity, and enormous numbers of ordinary people simply trying to wake up tomorrow morning. That last group rarely gets enough attention. Most Comanche people are not spending every hour fighting. Most settlers are not spending every hour fighting either. They are living. Someone is cooking. Someone is repairing a saddle. Someone is watching children. Someone is complaining that a horse has wandered away. Someone is tired. Someone has a toothache. Someone is wondering whether winter will be difficult. History remembers the warrior because the warrior is dramatic. Daily life is quieter. But daily life is what everyone is fighting to preserve. For the pioneer family, the cabin represents that life. For the Comanche family, the mobile camp and buffalo country represent it. Each sees the other's expansion as a threat, and eventually one possesses resources the other cannot match. By the end of the 19th century, the old Comancheria no longer exists as an independent power. Railroads cross lands once dominated by mounted bands. Cattle ranches spread across the plains. Barbed wire divides grass that once appeared limitless. Towns grow. Telegraph wires connect distant settlements. Later come roads, then automobiles. The landscape is domesticated one fence post at a time. Places where travelers once feared to camp become ordinary stretches of highway. You can cross in hours what once required dangerous days of travel. Water comes from taps. Directions come from signs. At night, electric lights spread across towns that would have seemed impossible to the people who once watched campfires from distant ridges. And yet the Comanche do not disappear. That is important. The end of Comancheria is not the end of the Comanche. Too many old histories treat native peoples as though they simply fade out once military resistance ends. They do not. Families continue. Language continues. Memory continues. Traditions adapt. Communities survive reservation policies, allotment, economic hardship, cultural pressure, and generations of government attempts to reshape native life. The Comanche Nation remains. Its headquarters are in Lawton, Oklahoma, not far from Fort Sill. Think about that geography. The place associated with the surrender of the last major free Comanche band now lies beside a living Comanche community. The story did not end at the fort gates. Only one chapter did. And now, before we finish, let us return to the cabin where we began. It is night again. The year is somewhere in the middle decades of the 19th century. You lie beneath a rough blanket. The fire has burned down. Your boots are beside the bed. Your rifle rests near the wall. Outside, the horses are quiet. You have worked all day. Your hands ache. Tomorrow, there will be more fence to repair, more wood to cut, more water to carry. Nothing about your life feels historical. You are simply tired. Then a horse raises its head. You hear movement. Your eyes open. For several seconds you remain completely still. There. A faint sound. Perhaps hoofbeats. You reach toward the rifle. Your heart begins to move faster. You listen again. Nothing. The wind presses gently against the cabin. A branch scratches the roof. One of the horses snorts. You wait. Minutes pass. Eventually, your hand relaxes. Whatever you heard is gone. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps a distant herd. Perhaps travelers. Perhaps riders who saw the settlement and decided to continue elsewhere. You will never know. And that uncertainty is the answer to the question we began with. Why were pioneers so terrified of Comanche warriors? Not because Comanche warriors were supernatural, not because every frightening frontier story was true, not because settlers lived through attacks every night. They were terrified because the Comanche possessed a combination of abilities uniquely suited to the southern plains: exceptional horsemanship, mobility, knowledge of the landscape, rapid mounted archery, flexible tactics, large horse herds, the ability to travel enormous distances and strike places whose inhabitants believed themselves safe. For generations, governments struggled to counter those advantages. Spain tried, Mexico tried, Texas tried, the United States tried. Repeating firearms eventually narrowed the tactical gap. More forts and settlers reduced open space. Railroads compressed distance. Military campaigns attacked camps and horse herds. Commercial buffalo destruction shattered the economic foundation of independent plains life. Only when all of those pressures converged did Comanche resistance finally collapse. The frightened pioneer with a rifle beside the bed could not know any of this. He did not know that someday trains would cross the prairie. He did not know that the buffalo would nearly vanish. He did not know that Quanah Parker would one day ride in a presidential inaugural parade. He knew only the darkness outside his cabin. And somewhere beyond that darkness was Comancheria, a world larger than his maps, older than his fence, and far more powerful than he had expected. The fire gives one final crack. The room becomes quiet. Outside, moonlight settles across the grass. There are no riders tonight, only wind. Only the slow movement of horses sleeping beneath the stars. And perhaps that is where we should leave them. Not in the middle of a charge, not beneath gunfire, but in the quiet that existed between all those remembered moments of violence. A Comanche child sleeping beside his family, a settler asleep behind a wooden door. Two worlds beneath the same enormous sky. Each afraid of what the other might bring with the morning. Each certain that the land ahead contains their future, neither yet knowing what history will take from them. The prairie keeps no argument. Grass grows over wagon tracks. Rain softens hoofprints. Old forts collapse. Buffalo bones disappear into the soil. And eventually even the loudest battles become quiet enough to tell beside a fire. So tonight, as we leave the southern plains behind, remember the sound that once kept frontier families awake. Hoofbeats in darkness, sometimes real, sometimes imagined, but for generations, never entirely impossible. And that was enough.